Hello wrestling fans. Welcome back to the $20 million Pro Wrestle Machine studio and welcome back to the show. We are almost finished with our journey through 1997 Observers. What a time it has been, looking forward to 1998. Let's get to it. Through the use of the Pro Wrestle Machine. December 22, 1997 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. Early attitude ERA controversies over content. Wrestlers refusing to do jobs. And Shawn Michaels riling up crowds. Ken Shamrock vs. Nobuhiko Takada UFC fight cancelled, and much more. By Observer staff. It was becoming very clear that this was not the WWF we thought we knew. After getting past the turmoil regarding the ending of Bret Hart's tenure and the finish of the Survivor Series match, the World Wrestling Federation is now facing even more controversy coming from three different fronts, all of which in some ways are related to Shawn Michaels. The WWF's more risque edge set a new standard for being gross on the December 8th Raw show from Portland, Maine. On the show, Michaels did an interview going on in descriptive detail about a big smelly turd, describing Owen Hart as being a small piece of the turd that keeps coming back up no matter how many times he flushes the toilet. Later in the show, after doing an angle where he removed all his clothes with the exception of his underwear, he looked right at the camera and grabbed and shook whatever was in his pants. This has raised some issues about the direction of the company when talking about its past marketing and some of its current marketing toward young children. The recent characterizations of Goldust and Luna with the illusions of having an insane bondage relationship have also come under the same criticism. There is talk within the industry that the Los Angeles Times will be running a major story in the entertainment section in approximately 1 week regarding the contradiction of WWF running adult-oriented programming and storylines while having its television shows viewed by a young audience, which includes a sizable children under 12 audience. And the shows are even being sponsored by products aimed directly at a very young audience. Phil Mushnick of the New York Post is also expected to run some sort of a short item regarding the Michaels interview, although it's expected he'll be an equal opportunity critic, also bringing up WCW in regard to the Ravens cult angle and ECW for using porn star Jenna Jameson. With reports in the industry of the Los Angeles article being on its way and faced with some severe criticism of the December 8th show, the WWF fired its own preemptive strike on the December 15th Raw in a short-taped interview by Vince McMahon that appeared to have been done earlier in the day. McMahon stated that the WWF was changing because they want to entertain the wrestling fans in what he described as a more contemporary manner. He categorized the new direction as more broad-based entertainment and tried to compare the programming with music videos, soap operas, Jerry Springer, Seinfeld and King of the Hill. He attempted to get pro wrestling, with the sports entertainment term used, as positioned as more entertainment, which because it is accepted as not being real, has a wider latitude toward what is acceptable than in a sporting event, saying they use the term sports entertainment even though they are entertainment simply because there are great athletes and great athleticism involved. He said the public was tired of the same old good guys against bad guys, using those terms in a very condescending manner, and said the days of superheroes telling kids to say their prayers and take their vitamins are passé. McMahon tried to come off as a nice guy, toning down some of the self-righteous arrogance that made him such a big heel in his televised comments on Bret Hart. Without exactly saying so, he gave the impression that they would tone down the first hour of Raw, that the second hour would be more risque, saying it was geared toward a more mature audience, and that most of the objectionable material from this point forward would be edited from the morning shows. He talked about the new direction causing a huge increase in the Raw ratings, which is an overstatement to a few-week trend caused mainly from curiosity over a unique finish to a well-hyped match and every week attempting to keep that story alive. A combination of Nitro going 3 hours with the debut of Bret Hart and one of the hottest football games in years featuring the attempted miracle of the Jerry Rice return and the Joe Montana retirement ceremony put the Raw ratings back to its old level with a 2.71 rating, 2.85 first hour, 2.58 seconds hour, and a 4.14 share. Nitro, probably somewhat due to Hart, did far better than expected going in against such strong football competition, doing a 4.11 rating, 4.38 first hour, 3.88 seconds hour, 4.08 third hour, and 6.30 share, while the Nitro replay did a 1.55 rating and 4.19 share. Nitro peaked at 4.9 in its typical 8:45 to 9 p.m. slot with the Mysterio Jr. and Guerrero vs. Parka and Psicosis match. The opening head-to-head segment, Flair/Anderson/Police interview plus Dylan/Bischoff confrontation versus Undertaker/Kane conflict, saw Nitro have a 4.1 to 2.8 edge. Raw closed the gap to a 3.5, Hall vs. Jericho, to 3.0, Lawler vs. Michinoku, Rocky and Nation of Domination video confrontation with Austin, and it stayed close at 3.6, McMichael/Meng/Goldberg angle versus Dude versus Sham. Actually, the WWF ratings peak of the night to 3.0. Nitro picked up to a 4.3 for Steiners vs. Norton and Conan and the beginning of Savage vs. Booker T, while Raw fell to 2.6 for Henry vs. Brawler. The McMahon/Owen Hart interview confrontation picked Raw up to 2.9, while Nitro did a 4.0 for the ending of T vs. Savage and the Benoit vs. Riggs match. The Dylan Bischoff and Bret Hart segment saw WCW do a 4.3, while Raw fell to 2.5 for Brandy vs. Sultan. Austin/Nation of Domination's second confrontation, including tossing the belt into the ocean. I believe it was the first time all season that a segment where Austin was the focal point of actually saw a ratings decline. Nitro held a 4.0 to 2.4 lead for Luger vs. Bagwell going against the McMahon interview on the content of the show and Blackman vs. Estrada. Finally, Nitro did a 4.0 for Flair Hennig and the closing Hogan Sting non-angle, while Raw ended at 2.5 for DX vs. LOD. On the December 15th show, which was taped before word of these articles surfaced, but the commentary was done live, Kevin Kelly and Michael Cole referred to Billy Gunn as B.A. Billy Gunn, without saying the words badass in the first hour. During the second hour, Owen Hart went on an obscenity-laced tirade work-shoot-style interview with all the questionable language edited out. Plenty of questionable language in interviews by Steve Austin on the bridge, and tapes involving Austin and Vince McMahon and their incident the previous week was readily visible through even a cursory reading of lips. The fact is that things are only going farther in that direction, as on the December 11th Raw show taped in Lowell, Massachusetts for airing on December 22nd, there is a segment where Michaels and Hunter Hearst Helmsley both remove all their clothing with the exception of T-back Speedos, revealing the words Merry and Christmas written on their respective butt cheeks. And there remain weekly attempts to get Sable into as little clothing as possible, the end result making Sable on tour this weekend in at least some of the cities actually get a bigger pop than Undertaker. There is no question the WWF has been trying, actually for more than 1 year, although it's gone farther in this direction over the past several weeks, to change from being a kiddie-oriented show to appeal more to early 20s males, the group most likely to buy tickets to arena events and the group most likely to create a heated atmosphere in the buildings. It is an obvious reaction toward losing the Monday night ratings war to WCW, which actually popularized the bad attitude wrestlers with the NWO spray painting, pointing to their crotch, and saying "bite me." Due to fear of potential sponsor backlash, WCW has attempted of late to differentiate itself from WWF, and Eric Bischoff has ordered some of that behavior when it comes to gestures, language and phraseology to be toned down. The Raw show airs from 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. on the USA Network, and there is nothing more sexual or for that matter more violent on the Raw program than USA regularly runs during those hours on other nights of the week. There are arguments, such as were expressed during the Brian Pillman/Steve Austin Gunn angle, that pro wrestling looks too real to get away with the same things that occur with regularity of a violent drama or a Tanda tease show, as much of the USA Network's late-night programming is combination of. However, much of the Raw show is also repeated on both Saturday and Sunday mornings, and very little has been edited out. If the WWF is going to put most of the more risque material in the second-hour War Zone show, that was a recent decision in face of the heat, as the Michaels/Helmsley deal wearing nothing but their jocks was taped for the start of the first hour on December 22nd. It is believed that material, along with the Goldust/Luna interviews and angles, will largely be edited off the weekend morning television shows. In different countries where television broadcast standards are different, lots of things going on Raw don't make it to the airwaves. This of course brings up the question of standards in pro wrestling. Please. Pro wrestling has no standards. It will exploit deaths in a war to get its top babyfaces over. It will exploit deaths of its personnel to draw a television rating the next night. It will regularly advertise matches and talent knowing full well it isn't going to appear. To say it'll exploit the physical health of its competitors and then chew them up and spit them out is an understatement, although in that aspect it is in no way any better or worse than any sport with any kind of an injury rate. It will exploit almost any situation if there is a possibility it'll mean ratings or dollars. Every business, including this one, should have standards. It just so happens in this one the standards are very low. The economic standards are that if it goes too far, its audience will constrict. In wrestling's past, this has happened numerous times with numerous promotions, although the nature of the desensitized audience today makes it less likely than in the past. A niche group like ECW can go very far since it's not drawing a general audience to begin with. A more mainstream group like WWF has an audience that it may turn off by going too far off the deep end. But at this point, there are no signs that is happening, even though people express the fear this direction will end up with that result. Television ratings are up. That probably can be credited in most part due to the curiosity over the Survivor Series finish and the aftermath regarding Bret Hart, but there is no evidence any of these risque angles have resulted in any measurable number of people turning off their television sets in disgust either. Arena attendance hasn't shown any decline. In fact, overall, it is on the rise. And the decline in the buy rate of the December 7th pay-per-view from the one the month before is more attributable to the television more being focused on burying a guy who wasn't there and less on pushing the main event challenger, combined with the unusual circumstances leading up to making the November main event a hot ticket, and not due to a turnoff because of the controversial nature of the angles or television behavior of some of the top stars, other than in the case of Michaels, having him spend more time getting over his past opponent than his future one in his television interviews leading to the pay-per-view. My feeling on parents who have kids watching is simple. When the WWF started down this path, there were parents probably caught in a squeeze with them watching something with their kids that they didn't realize was coming. That day is over. The direction is clear, although I think the Raw show, and the second hour for sure, would best be served having a TVM rating as opposed to TV PG, since that's what those ratings were designed for in the first place. I personally had a lot of qualms regarding pro wrestling when it was aimed to young children in the 80s. Particularly the idea that Hulk Hogan's name was used as a vitamin pitchman for vitamins aimed at young children when he himself attained his stardom in wrestling largely through using excessive amounts of steroids, and he was hardly alone in that contradiction, as the entire business was marketed to young children filled with performers where steroids had become a staple of their diet. Then again, there are plenty of NBA players with dolls sold at Christmas, and people who are close to the NBA can point out similar contradictions between public perception and reality. By the way, because somebody else does the same thing doesn't make it any less of a contradiction. At this point, if parents have a problem with the content, they need to know, and after a week or two of viewing should know what it is and where it is going, and they should act appropriately. Don't blame the producers of the movie Scream 2 if you take your young children to the movie and they end up being scared during some of the scenes. At the same time, don't blame the media for investigation and criticizing when standards of practice reach new lows. The shows air on weekend mornings and still have a sizable young children's audience, and where many of the sponsors themselves aim their products toward children. The WWF has not only opened itself up for criticism but asking for it. They can either modify the product or decide to attempt to weather the storm, although the latter approach does have its risks. There has been no audience backlash nor any sponsor backlash at this point, but for anyone to predict what the long term of this will or won't bring would be foolish. The WWF was hit hard on many fronts in the early 90s, and the problems did not immediately affect the business side. But in the long term, its business, and for that matter the entire industry, took a major tumble, and the result was several years of multi-million-dollar losses for both WWF and WCW, although WCW was going to lose money at that point in time no matter what the economic climate was. The entire industry started rebounding in 1996, and this past year has been one of the most profitable in this country in many years. If the lessons of what took it down in the past are ignored, the probability is that it'll eventually in some form go down again for the same ignoring of warning signs. Yet, that is hardly the only controversy related to the product. Over the past week, coming in the wake of the Bret Hart fiasco and the Survivor Series finish, two of the WWF's three remaining top stars, Steve Austin and Shawn Michaels, dropped their respective singles championships, Michaels losing the European belt, and not the WWF belt, without either doing a job. In the case of Austin, the original plan was for him to lose the title at the December 7th pay-per-view to Rocky Maivia. When he balked, a compromise was worked out where instead he got over his defiant anti-establishment role. Maivia got the title, although the reasons clearly made no sense and Austin didn't have to do a job. As best we can tell, there was no heat regarding what ended up happening, as everyone involved in the decision-making process was comfortable with the compromise, although the end result was a storyline that made no logical sense in regard to Maivia ending up with the title. The approach Austin took, basically since the current plan is for him to win the WWF title at WrestleMania from Michaels, is that since he's headlining Mania, he didn't think it would be good for him to do a high-profile job to a heel who was just getting established as a top name like Maivia, even though no doubt the finish would have involved tons of outside interference. Not to mention that unlike in his past, his physical limitations wouldn't allow him to put on a great match in a losing effort. Whether one agrees with the logic or his side of things, and it isn't believed that he has creative control clause in his deal with Vince McMahon like Hart did, there's a logical argument that can be made if you want to take that side. Austin shouldn't be the IC champion today. He's unable to work lengthy singles matches, and that title belt won't make him any more of a star than not having it. The title belt will be a big help in elevating Maivia, although he would be helped that much more as a new superstar if he actually won the belt from Austin. At the same time, the argument could be made that Austin should be protected from doing a job since he is going to headline Mania, not to mention that he's currently the hottest star in the industry. Should be WrestleMania with his limitations, unless they had a truck parked in the aisle again as a gimmick and had D'Lo Brown going through the windshield, they would be hard-pressed to have a good match. But that line of logic hardly makes sense for the second scenario. At the December 11th tapings in Lowell, Massachusetts, Michaels dropped the European belt to Helmsley. It started out with the aforementioned interview where they ended up in nothing but their jocks. Sergeant Slaughter then came out and said that since Michaels hadn't defended the European title in more than 60 days, that he was ordering a title match to be held later in the show and that Michaels' opponent would be Helmsley. At one point, which will likely be during the first segment of the second hour, the match begins. However, Owen Hart did a run-in before it ever got off the ground. The match was then teased until the end of the show, and the two did a mock slow-motion match. Imagine this, an overtly fake pro wrestling match, ending with Michaels literally laying down for Helmsley and getting up and crying mockingly about how sad he was for losing the title, and Slaughter, vowing to not be made a fool of, ordering Helmsley to defend the title against Hart on the ensuing Raw, which will air live on December 29th from the Nassau Coliseum. Since this scenario hasn't completely unfolded, we'll just look at the logic defying in it. With Michaels holding the European title, which he originally was given since he wouldn't job for Davey Boy Smith in England but was then given it presumably to set up doing a later job in April for Smith on the second England pay-per-view show, which obviously also is never going to happen. It created the perfect opportunity for the WWF to create a new world title contender and someone who could be put in the position vacated by Bret Hart, whether it be Dude Love, Owen Hart, Ken Shamrock, Vader, or someone else. That wrestler could pin Michaels cleanly and win a title, albeit a secondary title, which would logically spin off in the wrestler holding the clean win in a title match over the WWF champion, but with the WWF belt not at stake, getting a WWF title run either on pay-per-view or at the house shows in the early part of 1998. Instead, Michaels, to avoid doing the logical job and a time when the job would have helped business and done nothing to hurt him since he's maintaining the theoretical top spot in the company as WWF champion, instead got the belt moved over to Helmsley, who's dropping it to any of the aforementioned wrestlers or anyone else wouldn't carry anywhere close to the boost of them to the next level. We aren't clear whether it was Michaels' suggestion to give the belt to Helmsley so he could avoid doing the job when asked to drop it, or the promotion simply recognizing all the problems inherent in asking Michaels to do a job, when the real job they need without any compromise is the one to Austin, and coming up with a scenario as a way to get the belt onto somebody else without ruffling Michaels' feathers at this point coming in the wake of Austin not doing a job when he was originally asked isn't clear. For those keeping score, that makes of Michaels 9 championship reigns in his WWF tenure, 3 WWF titles, 3 IC titles, 2 tag team and 1 European. He's done exactly 2 jobs to drop them, both in situations where it was a short-known turnaround, WWF title to Sid, IC title to Marty Jannetty, until he got the respective belts back. In the excuse category, there was 1 career-ending knee injury, there was 1 walking out after a fight claiming unsafe working conditions, there was a breakup of a team rather than dropping a tag title, there was 1 quitting the promotion, there was 1 stemming from a concussion in an out-of-the-ring skirmish, and there was this most creative one of all. That makes him either the most clever or the least professional champion of our era, not to mention arguably the most talented to keep getting titles with his track record. Even though the end result is the same, there is an obvious huge distinction in where the problems lie in the process that led to the end result of this specific instance. Not to mention the environment all these things is leading to, and the 4 DQ endings on the last pay-per-view for a promotion that for most of this year has attempted to run mainly clean finishes but in recent months has become nothing but run-in DQs in the top matches, seems to indicate that problem is getting even more out of hand. And yet a third problem, which may at least for the time being be the most serious of all, occurred both at house shows on December 14th in Memphis and December 15th in Little Rock, when, due to actions and decisions that appeared at least to people at the show to be by Michaels, the main event didn't take place at either show, resulting in a near riot in Memphis and a full-blown riot in Little Rock. In Memphis, the scheduled main event of Jerry Lawler and Jeff Jarrett versus Michaels and Helmsley never took place. Before a crowd of 5,078 fans at the Pyramid, Michaels came out for his once-per-week scheduled arena match and was met with so much garbage thrown his way that he simply refused to wrestle, and the show ended without the match ever taking place. As it was described to us, the show itself was poor and the crowd, many of whom had been drinking heavily, were getting unruly even before the main event. Michaels was hit with a few cokes, and a large wad of tobacco juice nailed Helmsley in the face, at which point Michaels grabbed the house mic and said, "Well, that just cost you your main event," and walked out of the ring with Helmsley and Chyna. When the crowd realized what had happened, they got even more unruly. There was an attempt by Dude Love, who was at the event but couldn't wrestle due to fractured ribs, to get the crowd to chant HBK to get Michaels to change his mind and wrestle, but he refused to come back out. Finally, Lawler tried to apologize to the crowd, but the crowd pelted the hometown hero with debris after chanting for Lawler and Jarrett to wrestle each other, and Lawler responding by saying that since he didn't have a contract to wrestle Jarrett, that match couldn't take place. That, combined with no refunds being offered when some fans began demanding them at the box office, made the mood of the fans even worse, with the general feeling leaving the building among many fans, according to our reports, is that WWF had killed the city for themselves, and fans swearing that they'd stick with WCW. Of course, with the big promotions running so infrequently in specific markets, usually the fans forget a bad show by the time the next show comes to town. However, WBII, the Memphis area television station that broadcasts the syndicated show in the market, received more than 130 complaining phone calls from fans that attended the house show by early the next morning due to the main event fiasco. And in addition, that morning, another group of fans who attended the show were picketing the television station from the start of business until noon, claiming to be in protest against the tactics of the WWF. Based on the report we had of the incident, the fans' actions could not be blamed strictly or even largely on Michaels inciting them, as much as a few fans being drunk and out of control. However, this situation came close to happening in other cities where Michaels' gimmick is to incite the audience into throwing things at him, including in at least one recent case by saying things like he's heard the fans in insert city have terrible aim, thereby making himself the target for every object every idiot has nearby. It was Michaels who decided to walk out when the fans were so unruly. The WWF backed Michaels up in Memphis, claiming WWF officials were the ones who decided to end the show early for the safety of all concerned, although that decision actually made the arena even more unsafe because it only made the fans' behavior worse. They blamed the problem on local security that didn't search fans as they entered the arena, as they routinely had done for other wrestling events in the city, and that allowed fans to bring bottles of alcohol into the building with them, resulting in several drunk and unruly fans who had empty bottles in their possession. The reports the WWF received from the agents on the road were the fans were throwing empty bottles, and there were internet reports saying Michaels was hit with a bottle or with flying ice, although several live sources have denied Michaels was hit with either a bottle or ice. The throwing of things began to get out of hand in the previous match between Shamrock and Phineas Godwin, with Henry Godwin's antics at ringside starting fans in the mood to pelt the ring, and when Michaels and Helmsley came out for their main event, they might as well had painted bullseyes on their faces. Little Rock was even worse. According to several reports, the undercard for the show at the Barton Coliseum was terrible, and even the densest marks were getting restless about the poor quality of the matches, in particular a terrible match with Kane vs. Chains and an Undertaker vs. Rocky Maivia casket match that only lasted 2 minutes due to Undertaker being injured and having high blood pressure. In addition, fans were upset because the card that was taking place was completely different than the lineup that was advertised, with no explanations given. The scheduled main event was to be Shamrock, with Danny Hodge, one of the greatest real wrestlers who ever lived and was also the top pro wrestler in the area during the 60s and 70s, as the perennial NWA World Junior Heavyweight Champion, as his manager for one night only, against Helmsley, with Michaels in his corner, which drew 6,449 fans. We're not clear if that was going to happen, as we received a report that Helmsley was going to face Dude Love in the main event, although that may not have been correct since Dude has fractured ribs and was supposed to only make appearances and not wrestle this week. Since fans had no idea what was going to take place because everything had been changed, my impression is that the show was stopped when Michaels and the rest of DX walked out, and that neither Shamrock nor Hodge actually came out for the main event match before the show ended. Michaels and Helmsley came to the ring and began riling up the crowd that was already mad about the poor undercard. Naturally, they became target practice again, and when a piece of paper hit Michaels, he told the crowd that they had just lost their main event and walked out with Helmsley and Chyna. Fans, thinking it was just part of the act, didn't react right away. After several minutes, DX failed to come back in the ring, no opponent for Helmsley appeared, and the ring announcer said that they had refused to come out and the show was over. At this point, a real riot started, with chairs and whiskey bottles being thrown everywhere, including at police trying to get the crowd out of the building. The situation got so bad that the police had to spray the building with tear gas to get the fans outside. Several fans tried to get refunds and were unsuccessful, and at that point a second riot took place in the parking lot before the police broke it up. At least one fan was rushed to the hospital, but there didn't appear to be any serious injuries to fans either night. This incident was so out of hand it was reported on the news later that night, with at least one report giving the impression that the WWF wouldn't be allowed back in the city. Although with this all happening at deadline, it is really too soon to figure out how this is going to unfold locally. The reports from this event live pointed the finger directly at Michaels for the problem starting, although the behavior of the fans was the actual real problem. But unlike in Memphis, the real problems didn't occur until the fans realized that they weren't going to see the main event and that DX walking out wasn't simply part of the show to get heat. Crowds pelting Michaels with garbage have become commonplace since he made his latest heel turn, but these were the first situations where a show ended abruptly and a main event never took place, although situations beforehand with Michaels and at some WCW house shows on the West Coast a few months ago threatened to get to this level, and ECW was having fan problems on almost a regular basis of late, and came close on a few occasions from nearly having a show stopped on them before the main event. The actions of the wrestlers have encouraged fans throwing objects, so even though it is a minority of fans, some if not most drunk and engaged in mob mentality, that are ruining things and making conditions dangerous for the rest of the fans and the wrestlers. The fact is Michaels' act encourages it, and in Little Rock, basically caused the riot by walking out. Supposedly the difference between a professional top heel is they can rile the crowd up to a certain point, but calm them down before things get out of control. That fine line is easier to write about than totally control, but if the WWF hasn't gotten the message that the DX act, at least on the road shows, needs to be toned down, then whatever happens is being asked for at this point, because Memphis was a warning. Actually, there were many warnings before Memphis that clearly have been ignored by the WWF. Little Rock was no longer a warning. Little Rock was caused by ignoring warnings. Hopefully December 15th can be a wake-up call for both WWF and WCW, because on the live Nitro that night in Charlotte, about a half dozen fans at different points in the show hopped the guardrail, and security was having a field day trying to stop them before hitting the ring, and at least 3 made it into the ring, one stomped on by Randy Savage, another pulled out by security, and another snatched by ref Randy Anderson. It was described as the single most unruly crowd in the history of Charlotte wrestling, blamed in some part by being a 3-hour show with fans drinking for the entire 3 hours and lots of incidents of fans throwing things at the wrestlers. As mentioned before, someday the drunk fan or fan looking to impress his friends on television isn't going to be smaller than Randy Anderson, and the situation is going to get worse than it already has. In Charlotte, the main angle to end the show was totally botched up because so many fans were hitting the ring, ruining the built-up climax to the show. WCW only has itself to blame. After the idiotic angle they ran to glorify fans hitting the ring at Havoc in Las Vegas, it was inevitable what would happen, and the fiascos in both Charlotte and Little Rock on December 15th were not isolated instances, but the result of fans reacting as the promotions on television have educated them to act. If they don't get educated differently, this industry is going to blow its current level success, not due to risque programming or gutless booking of talent that thinks it is above the business, but due to an unforeseen tragedy taking place at one of its live events. WCW officials after the Charlotte event said that they were going to institute a policy similar to the NFL, NHL, and many concert acts, and that drinking will be banned after the midpoint of the show at all their arena events. In addition, they are going to beef up security at the shows. The proposed Ken Shamrock vs. Nobuhiko Takada UFC match on the December 21st pay-per-view show from Yokohama fell apart during the week, with Shamrock appearance on the show being cancelled. In addition, over the weekend Vitor Belfort's fighting on the show was in question, although now appears to be back on, but against what almost appears to be a hand-picked opponent. Shamrock and the World Wrestling Federation agreed to terms, which Shamrock signed on December 4th for a payoff which would have been in the range of WFC's previous record single-event payoff of $150,000 for the Takada match. However, as noted last week, on December 8th Takada, when asked about the match at the Kingdom House show, said that he had no intention of fighting on the UFC show and was suffering from several injuries that would make it impossible for him to even begin training until early next year. Semaphore Entertainment Group, which signed Shamrock after being given the word that Takada, whose drawing power was considered almost a must given slow ticket sales for the live event at the 17,100-seat Yokohama Arena, would only do the show if Shamrock was his opponent, must have fallen victim to a communication breakdown somewhere along the chain regarding its Japanese partners doing the house show promotion and Takada himself. Those close to the situation claimed Takada had never agreed to do the show in the first place, although Semaphore Entertainment Group had spoken of his participation as a possibility ever since its press conference in Japan, and how things got to the situation they did are perplexing to say the least. Kingdom had its first televised card on December 14th with Takada doing the color commentary, and during the show Takada was asked about when he returned to the ring, and Takada didn't give a definitive answer, saying only that he would begin training early next year. To make things even more muddy, Shamrock's contract reportedly guaranteed him the money once it was signed, even if the fight was cancelled, which it ended up being. The WWF was also to get a sizable booking fee as their end of the deal. However, the group on the hook, so to speak, for providing the big payoff in the contract was not Semaphore Entertainment Group, but its Japanese co-promoters, who are attempting to get out of paying it, claiming a contract loophole. The contract provided, in the case of the opponent backing out, for Shamrock to have veto power if a substitute match was suggested. Since the deal to use Shamrock and pay the big money was not primarily due to whatever drawing power he'd bring to the US pay-per-view, although that was considered a helpful part of the deal, but more because it was the only way they believed to get Takada into the show, the decision was made that rather than offer Shamrock a new opponent, that his price tag was such that they decided his appearance would be scrapped to save themselves the big payoff. Shamrock and the WWF officially got the word from Semaphore Entertainment Group on December 10th, and Shamrock left what was reportedly a brutal high-intensity training camp in Dallas where he was trying to basically cram 1 month's worth of training and conditioning into 1 week, and returned to the WWF for the television taping on December 11th in Lowell, Massachusetts, and working the weekend house shows in Tennessee and Arkansas. The WWF never mentioned Shamrock's match on the December 8th Raw show, even though the contract was signed and they were at the time completely unaware of the problems regarding the match that had surfaced in Japan. However, they did plug the UFC pay-per-view in a 30 seconds plugs, hyping in specific that it was coming from Japan and the appearance of Frank Shamrock challenging for the middleweight title on both Weekend USA Network shows and twice on the December 15th Raw. Supposedly the WWF was going to give the UFC show, and in particular the Ken Shamrock match with Takada, a huge promotional push all weekend, and in particular on Raw. There have been hints thrown that UFC will try and reach a compromise in that they'll book Shamrock on the May pay-per-view when they are tentatively scheduled to return to Japan, in which case he'll get more advance notice and UFC and WWF will both have more time to use his name in promotion of the event and in conjunction with WWF storylines as well. The fact that the March show will be in the US, and its proximity time-wise to WrestleMania, make it highly unlikely WWF would even consider allowing him on the show, nor that UFC would want to pay that kind of money without a Japanese partner footing the bill for what it would cost to get him on the show. But doing the second proposed May show in Japan is largely dependent upon the first show doing well, and that has many questions of its own. But that wasn't the only problem facing the show in its final days. Semaphore Entertainment Group received word over the weekend that Belfort was ill and wanting to cancel his appearance on the show. While Semaphore Entertainment Group officially received word over the weekend, there had been rumors going back 2 weeks more, along with lines of Belfort being unhappy. Belfort's camp attempted to pull out just a day or two after their opponent for the show was announced, 5'9", 220-pound wrestler Brad Kohler, who has compiled a 7-0 record in NHB, working in smaller promotions in the U.S. including Hook and Shoot in Indiana, Extreme Challenge in Iowa, and IFC, although has no world ranking in any NHB publication. Kohler is known primarily for stamina, as one of his victories lasted 50 minutes, and stamina is what Belfort appeared to lack in his recent loss to Randy Couture. After more negotiations, at press time it appeared Belfort would fight in the UFC, however due to his claimed illness, wanted a different, i.e. easier, opponent, and the most likely foe appeared to be former UFC competitor, 38-year-old Joe Charles, who has a losing 1-loss record, having fought basically all over the world as kind of an undercard level fighter. Even with a win, this scenario is only going to do wonders for Belfort's credibility within the martial arts world in his attempt to bounce back from his first defeat. The 2 title matches remain Maurice Smith 4-0 versus Couture 3-0, and Frank Shamrock 1-1 versus Jackson 3-0, along with a 3-match heavyweight tournament with a first round of Tank Abbott 6-6 versus pro wrestler Yoji Anjo 0-1, and Carlson Gracie Jiu-Jitsu disciple Marcus Conan Silveira 3-1 versus Alex Hunter 2-0 in UFC alternate matches. Hunter is a last week replacement for a Japanese sumo wrestler who pulled out over the weekend. There is also an alternates match with Trey Telligman 4-1 versus Kohler, which actually should be a higher level fight than any of those in the tournament main draw. The local promotion of the event in Japan has been barely existent. The first magazine ads appeared this past week, featuring a large, nearly full-page photo of Abbott and tiny snapshot-like photos of Abbott, Belfort, Smith, and Shamrock, Ensign Inoue, and Anjo, with no matches listed and maybe 2 or 3 of whom aren't even on the show. This listing is strange enough because Inoue, who I guess they were expecting to beat Frank Shamrock in the elimination match, was off the show since November 29th, and Ken Shamrock wasn't even approached to do the show in the first place until December 2nd, and didn't agree to terms until 2 days later. So there was never a period where the ad could have been done where one could have reasonably figured on both doing the show. It is believed Nippon TV, Channel 4 in Tokyo, was to have an extensive last week promotional campaign for the event, since it is carrying it on television. There's a thought process that UFC is damned either way in Japan. If the UFC goes through the roof like it started to do with the third show in the US in 1994, it'll attract all the same political opponents that it did in the United States and face problems from that end. If it doesn't, then it won't make it anyway. The main political difference between Japan and the US in regards to UFC is that the marriage of sleazy state athletic commissions and the corrupt boxing world that sees UFC as a threat for slicing a small piece out of its pie and exposing the illusion as to boxers being the toughest true fighters in the world doesn't exist in Japan. And you can trace a lot of UFC's political problems with ties that somehow all wind up either with the boxing industry or state athletic commissions that are largely funded through pro boxing and pro wrestling. Tokyo Sports released its 1997 Japanese Wrestling Awards this past week, with Masahiro Chono being named MVP. As mentioned in past years, these awards, voted on by 22 reporters, are largely political and traditional in nature. The idea is to spread the awards around among the top wrestlers. It is virtually impossible for a foreign wrestler to win an award, unless it is for Match of the Year, and in that case it almost always has to be against a Japanese wrestler, although in the case of this year, that really wouldn't have been an issue. And the junior heavyweights are never considered for the major awards. They also vote with the idea that wrestling is a shoot, which is why Sasaki, who got that huge push during the latter part of the year, was nominated in so many categories. They usually nominate 2 or 3 candidates for every award and then vote rather than blind voting. For MVP, the nominees were Chono, Kensuke Sasaki, and Mitsuharu Misawa, with Chono getting 16 votes and Misawa getting 6. The general belief is that even though Misawa was the better wrestler of the two, that Chono deserved the MVP award for introducing the NWO concept to Japan and along with it several more American ideas spicing up New Japan throughout the year, including doing the more insider-style interviews such as his heavily knocking his promotion and praising All Japan before the tag team tournament, which is certainly out of the ordinary for a pro wrestler anywhere. For Match of the Year, the 2 matches nominated were both Misawa vs. Kenta Kobashi, their January 20th match in Osaka and their October 21st match at Tokyo Budokan Hall. The latter match won 16-6. For Tag Team of the Year, Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Taue won over Chono and Keiji Muto by a 13-8 vote. For Best Wrestler of the Year, Misawa won over Sasaki by a 15-7 vote. For the Spirit Award, Hayabusa beat Sasaki by a 17-5 vote. For Best Technical Wrestler, Yuki Kondo, the current King of Pancrase, won over Jun Akiyama by a 14-8 vote. For Rookie of the Year, Kazuyuki Fujita won over Naoya Ogawa by a 19-3 vote. That's actually a big deal since these awards treat wrestling as if it was a shoot, and Ogawa received 20 times the push that Fujita did, although Fujita showed so much promise in comparison that it must have been hardly for almost everyone to ignore. For Woman Wrestler of the Year, they ended up giving it to the Heisei Saikyo Modaku Gurentai group of Linus Asuka, Shark Tsuchiya, and Eagle Sawai, who are a regular interpromotional trio. Also given awards were Riki Choshu, who retires on January 4th, along with Megumi Kudo and longtime All Japan referee Joe Higuchi, the latter two of whom retired earlier this year. Both the All Japan and New Japan promotions were given awards for finishing their 25th year in operation, as both started in 1972. They also gave an award to former wrestler Animal Hamaguchi, largely due to the success of his daughter Kyoko in winning her weight at the World Freestyle Championships, and a popularity award for Ogawa. They also gave Kyoko Hamaguchi and 2 other women wrestlers who won their weight class, and I believe Japan won the overall team championship at the World Freestyle Championships. It's really interesting the blend of shoot and work, since the women wrestlers awarded were for non-pro wrestling activities that were a shoot, and Kondo won his Technical Wrestler Award for being the champion in a largely shoot promotion, and yet he was being compared to a worker, who himself was actually a great amateur wrestler before going pro as an Olympic team alternate in the balloting. We only have sketchy details of the incident involving 2 wrestling fans and several WCW wrestlers at the Buffalo Airport Marriott, which is actually located in Amherst, New York, hotel bar on December 9th that resulted in Rick Rude being arrested. Based on several reports, Scott Norton, Rude, Marcus Bagwell, Lex Luger and Arn Anderson were at the hotel bar drinking at about 1 a.m. after a WCW Saturday night taping earlier that night in Erie, Pennsylvania. A fan accidentally bumped into Norton. Apparently the fan didn't back down to the huge Norton when it got confrontational, and a friend of his, who some thought may have been his brother, grabbed Norton so the first guy could hit him with a beer bottle. As you can imagine, all hell broke loose at that point, with the end result being that the fan was bounced around like a ping-pong ball by the wrestlers, resulting in, among other things, a broken nose believed to have come from Bagwell. Luger wound up with a black eye in the brawl. Hotel security and Amherst police arrived rather quickly. Rude was apparently rather vociferous with the police about arresting both fans for starting the fight, and apparently things got out of control with him to the point he was hit with a nightstick and maced by police to calm him down, and was arrested and spent the night in jail. At least one, if not both of the fans were also arrested, although we're not clear of the exact charges, but Rude and the injured fan were arraigned the next day and given a December 16th court date in Amherst, New York. There was some local television news coverage of the incident. The situation involving the status of Davey Boy Smith in the wake of the Bret Hart fiasco remains up in the air at press time, while the other members of the Hart family that were employed by Titan Sports have all filtered out, with Bret and Jim Neidhart in WCW and Owen staying with WWF. The situation with the British Bulldog is uncertain. The official situation with Neidhart is that after the WWF buried him in the television angles, they did offer him a contract. He had been working without a contract since he got the job with the WWF, originally largely as a favor to Bret, but also given the ultimatum to sign it immediately. When he didn't do so, the contract was pulled and he instead accepted an offer from WCW. It was believed that the WWF would offer Bulldog a contract release, although at press time that hasn't happened yet. Bulldog's attorney, John Houghton, has claimed to the WWF that they have breached his contract due to providing that good old unsafe working environment and claiming they weren't merchandising him to the level he deserved. The WWF's position appears to be that they are expecting to eventually give Bulldog a 30-day window to where he can negotiate with WCW, but haven't done so at press time. But unlike the situation with Bret Hart, they want Bulldog to buy his way out of the remainder of his contract for $150,000 if he were to choose to leave. Judging from the commentary on the television and other reports, the WWF seems to be going under the impression that he isn't going to return, but WCW doesn't seem to be counting on him coming either. Currently he is out of action for about 2 months after having arthroscopic knee surgery done on December 4th in Calgary. A quick note regarding the awards. Balloting is going on and the deadline for receiving a ballot is January 8th, so if you are going to fill one out, please to do immediately and send it in because mail at this time of the year is unpredictable. I also want to make a clarification regarding the Shoot Wrestler and Shoot Match of the Year. Those categories are for sport competitions and not matches that are worked entertainment matches. The Bret Hart vs. Shawn Michaels match in no way, shape, or form falls under the umbrella of a shoot. What Bret Hart, Chris Benoit, or Steve Austin do, or for that matter what Ken Shamrock does, in WWF or WCW rings, has absolutely nothing to do with shooting. Japanese television rundown. November 29th, New Japan. 1. NWO Sting and Hiroyoshi Tenzan beat Satoshi Kojima and Tadao Yasuda in 12:02 when Sting pinned Yasuda with a Scorpion Death Drop or reverse DDT. Really bad with Yasuda and Sting. It was like one of those WWF gangs matches. Dud. 2. Shinjiro Otani and Koji Kanemoto and Tatsuhiro Takaiwa beat Jushin Liger and El Samurai and Kendo Kashin in 17:28. Only the second half aired on television, and it was the expected excellent match. Takaiwa did the hottest triple bomb to date. Kanemoto's persona and psychology in the ring have improved by leaps and bounds this year to where he's a solid top 10 in the world performer. In fact, he was the standout here in a match that featured 3 of the top workers in the world, Liger, Otani and Samurai, and 2 of the most improved, Takaiwa and Kashin. After all kinds of great near falls at the end, Kanemoto pinned Kashin using a tiger suplex. 4 1/4 stars. 3. Kensuke Sasaki and Shinya Hashimoto and Kazuo Yamazaki beat Michiyoshi Ohara and Tatsutoshi Goto and Hiro Saito in 13:29 when Sasaki made Ohara submit to the power strangle. This Goto and Ohara push isn't one of New Japan's best angles. Ohara is decent, but Goto is probably the worst wrestler in the company. They were Extreme Attitude t-shirts. Bad. 1 star. 4. Keiji Muto and Masahiro Chono beat Tatsumi Fujinami and Kengo Kimura in an SG Tag Team Tournament match when Muto made Kimura submit to the figure 4 after a dragon screw leg whip. Not a bad match, but hardly a quality main event match either. 1 1/2 star. December 6th, New Japan. 1. Muto and Chono beat NWO Sting and Tenzan in a battle of NWO teammates in their tag tourney match when Muto pinned Sting after a Frankensteiner, which came out of nowhere. This match was really bad, but it was mainly backdrop for an angle. Goto and Ohara jumped Sting and Tenzan before the match. Muto and Chono then made the save and ended up putting a dog collar on Ohara and spray painting X on his back. This ended up leading to Goto and Ohara quitting the NWO to form the Freedom Dogs group. Kind of the New Japan answer to Ray Trailer, and we all know how over that one is. Once they started wrestling, despite it being the top two NWO teams against each other, there wasn't much heat and the action was bad. Goto and Ohara came out again and kidnapped Hiro Saito of the NWO, taking him to the back. 1/4 of 1 star. 2. Takaiwa pinned Samurai in 12:48. Good match with an excellent finish built around Takaiwa's triple bomb and Death Valley driver spots that are really over. The last 5 minutes aired on television. Takaiwa used the triple bomb and driver sequence but then picked Samurai up before the count of 3. Generally that's the signal that the guy on the bottom is going to come back and win, but not in this case, as Takaiwa then got the pin using the Death Valley driver off the middle ropes. 3 1/2 stars. 3. Liger and Kashin beat Kanemoto and Otani in 17:01. About half the match aired on television and it was another excellent match, particularly the finish. They did all their big spots for near falls. The biggest pop, stemming from the TV the previous week, was Kanemoto using the Tiger Suplex on Kashin, but this time Kashin kicked out. Kanemoto went for a moonsault and Kashin got his knees up. It ended up with Kashin and Kanemoto fighting, while Liger gave Otani a release German suplex and a pescado, while Kashin caught Kanemoto in the middle with the arm breaker for the submission. After the match, Kashin motioned about the IWGP Junior title that Otani holds and that he was going to challenge for. Otani jumped Kashin, but Liger clocked Otani with a chair. This Junior's feud is the most underrated feud of the year. 4 stars. 4. Hashimoto and Manabu Nakanishi beat Sasaki and Yamazaki in 1854 when Hashimoto pinned Yamazaki after a brainbuster. Most of the match consisted of working on Yamazaki's knee. Good main event, but nothing out of the ordinary. 3 stars. Puerto Rico. Some notes on the shows with the Promo Azteca wrestlers. Apparently there never was the WWF vs WCW match on Thanksgiving night to begin with, as not only was the La Parka that appeared on this tour actually Super Parka, but Huracan Castillo, Jesus of Los Boricuas, no-showed the card. On the November 27th show in Caguas, Jerry Estrada beat Lightning Kid, Northeast Indie wrestler Steve Corino, El Profe won a tuxedo match from Rico Suave, the Universal title match between Ray Gonzalez and challenger Razor Ramon, Rick Bogner, the second Razor Ramon in the WWF, ended up being changed. It was announced that Ramon had tore his tricep and he wasn't there. And with Gonzalez in the ring, Fidel Sierra, David Cannell from Florida, better known as Dave Sierra and a million other names throughout the years, hit the ring and began insulting Gonzalez. Gonzalez challenged him to a match but Sierra refused. Then Gonzalez challenged him to a street fight and he accepted, and then jumped Gonzalez, who juiced and was left in a bloodbath. They had the match later in the show which wound up as a double disqualification. Villano 3-pinned Ricky Santana to win the Puerto Rican title when Pierroth Jr. gave Villano a foreign object and he put it in his mask for the loaded headbutt finish. Invader number 1 and Pierroth Jr. went to a double count out and Carlos Colon beat Dutch Mantle via DQ when Victor the Bodyguard interfered. November 29th in Arecibo before 800 fans saw Profe beat Suave in a street fight. Colon beat Mantle via DQ when Mantle hit the ref and they did a pull-apart after the match. Gonzalez pinned Sierra to retain the Universal title. La Super Parka beat Muhammad Hussein in 3:44 with a Hurricane Rana. Estrada beat Richie Santiago. Santana regained the Puerto Rican title from Villano 3. Pierroth again tried to give Villano brass knucks, but this time Santana intercepted that pass and got them and used them to regain the title. Invader number 1 beat Pierroth when Villano 3 got a 2x4 and went to hit Invader, who moved, and Pierroth took the blow and was pinned, and in the finale, Mascara Sagrada and Tinieblas Jr., who was billed as the WWO heavyweight champion, went to a double countout with newcomer Bulldog Reigns and Skull Von Crush. Von Crush will be leaving after Christmas for his first All-Japan tour. Sagrada and Tinieblas Jr. were scheduled against the Canadian Glamour Boys, Shane and Sean Morley, but they also missed the weekend. Even though the Mexicans were sent by Promo Azteca and the tour was named the Invasion Azteca Tour, they used old AAA footage of the wrestlers on the WWC television show to promote them. On November 22nd in Arecibo during a prelim match between Victor Jovica and Victor the Bodyguard, a fan jumped the guard rail and got the nightstick away from one of the security guards, and before the fan was subdued, he got a few shots in and busted the bodyguard open to the point he was rushed to the hospital and needed 17 stitches to close the cut. All the house shows since the Mexican wrestlers left have been headlined by Colon and Gonzalez, alternating in singles matches or tags against either Mantle or Sierra. Mexico. As it turned out, EMLL ended its season at Arena Mexico on December 5th, so there was no year-end spectacular this year. To show just how slowly things moved this year, almost the entire year was built around El Hijo del Santo feuding with Felino, and later his brother Negro Casas. The only big stipulation match all year was the Santo Casas Mask vs. Hair match, which sold out Arena Mexico in September. The December 5th climax instead of a major stip match was the finals of the Copa Victoria, with Atlantis beating Blue Panther in 2 straight falls. Box E Lucha had Ida Awards ceremony on December 8th. We don't have much in the way of details other than Zorro was awarded Sexiest Wrestler, Pia Roth Jr. was awarded Best Heel, Mr. Aguila was named Rookie of the Year, Psicosis was named Most Spectacular, and Rey Mysterio Jr. was named Best Technical Wrestler. With the changing of the political party in power, the commission in the Distrito Federal, Mexico City metropolitan area, will undergo a change since those are largely political patronage posts. The 3 leading candidates for new commissioner are Rafael Bonetas, who is said to be a real pro wrestling traditionalist, which means that he'll be against the wilder stuff, current wrestler Fantasma, who would remove his mask and retire, and there is fear of him getting the post in Promo Azteca since the promotion fired him not all that long ago. Or Don Fernando Marcos, a famous wrestling television announcer from the 50s who is also a traditionalist but has been open in the media about talking about pro wrestling as a show with great athletes rather than trying to portray it as a sport. AAA had scheduled what was billed as its biggest card of the year on December 13th at the 15,000-seat outdoor stadium in Madero, headlined by a cage hair match. Last man in the cage loses his hair, with Heavy Metal and Pero Aguayo Jr. vs. Pigfudo and Sangre Chicana. Vampiro Canadiense, who was expected to officially quit the promotion for Azteca over the weekend, and Pero Sr. and AAA Mascara Sagrada vs. Cibernetico and Cobarde and Killer, Latin Lover and Mascara Sagrada Jr. and La Parca Jr. and Cuervo vs. AAA Psicosis and AAA Hysteria and AAA Mosco and Maniaco, plus a match with Fuerza Guerrera and Pentagon and Abismo Negro vs. Octagon, and 2 television stars who are on a very controversial program that shows legitimate brutal street fight type violence on television that got so much heat the president of Mexico ordered their show to be banned from television, which of course then makes them cult heroes to some. The Renovacion 2000 promotion ran its first big event on December 10th in Cuautitlan, headlined by Mil Mascaras and Dos Cars and Tinieblas Sr. vs. Mascara Año 2000 and Gran Marcos Jr. and Mano Negra, and only drew 300 fans. Promo Azteca had been building for months for its first major stipulation match on December 12th in Nezahualcóyotl, with Torero and Salcero both putting up their hair against the masks of Ultimo Guerrero and Ultimo Rebelde. The latter team was going to lose, so one of them in the days before the match quit the promotion and joined EMLL, ruining the bout. The top matches on December 12th now are Halloween defending the Latin American Wrestling Association title against Super Calo, Mascara Sagrada defending the IWC, the old Ron Scholar promotion in the United States, belt against Pirata Morgan, Super Muñeco and Venom at Oro Jr. and Super Astro vs. Damien and Super Crazy, Super Loco in WWF, and Mosco and Jurassico and Tinieblas Jr. and Tarzan Boy and Zorro and Lizmark Jr. vs. Black Magic and Jerry Estrada and Villano 3 and Juventud Guerrera. The major EMLL show of the week was December 12th at Arena Coliseo with a one-night tag team tournament with Lizmark and Shocker, Rosso de Plata and Frey Tormenta. Boy does that sound horrible, Dr. Wagner Jr. and El Satanico and Mascara Año 2000 and Universo 2000. All Japan. Giant Baba officially announced the biggest show in the history of the company for May 1, 1998 at the Tokyo Dome. At present there is nothing official, although the expected main event is Mitsuharu Misawa vs. Toshiaki Kawada for the Triple Crown. No negotiations have started with the WWF, but I'd expect a good chance they'll try and bring a few WWF stars in for the show. The next tour starts January 2nd at Korakuen Hall through January 26th at Osaka Furitsu Gym. Opening night has the traditional Battle Royal, which is traditionally awful. Gary Albright and Steve Williams and Ricky Santana vs. Mitsuharu Misawa and Jun Akiyama and Manukiya Mossman, Toshiaki Kawada and Masao Inoue vs. Kena Kobashi and Yoshinobu Kanemaru, Akira Taue and Kentaro Shiga vs. Tamon Honda and Jun Izumida. The latter 2 matches are the first day of a tag team tournament called the Asunaro Cup, which features a major star teaming with a younger star, with the finals of the tournament on January 23rd at Korakuen Hall on Baba's 60th birthday. Besides Kawada and Inoue, Kobashi and Kanemaru, Taue and Shiga and Honda and Izumida, also in are Jun Akiyama and Takao Mori, Mossman and Johnny Smith and Misawa and Satoru Asako. January 3rd at Korakuen Hall has the annual Junior Heavyweight Battle Royal plus Kobashi and Ace and Akiyama vs. Williams and Albright and Kimala 2. January 9th will have an All-Asian Tag Title defense by Akiyama and Amori against Wolf Hockfield and Smith. The two major shows of the tour are January 25th at Yokohama Bunka Gym, Kobashi and Johnny Ace defending the double tag team titles against Kawada and Taue, Mossman defending the PWF Junior title against Santana, Williams and Albright vs. Misawa and Amori and Akiyama vs. Smith, and January 26th in Osaka, Misawa defends Triple Crown against Akiyama, Taue and Kawada and Yoshinari Ogawa vs. Williams and Albright and Santana and Hockfield and Smith vs. Kobashi and Ace. The first Budokan Hall show of 1998 will be February 28th. November 30th TV show did a 3.7 rating. New Japan. It was officially announced this week, as we'd hinted in these pages, that Shinjiro Otani's opponent in the IWGP Junior title match at the Tokyo Dome will be Ultimo Dragon instead of Great Sasuke, for the political reasons outlined last week. Basically Sasuke working ECW and Taka Michinoku working WWF. Don Frye suffered a broken hand training in Minnesota, so we don't know his status for his Dome match against Naoya Ogawa. Ogawa was also training in Minnesota, probably working out their match. While there, the mags took a lot of photos of Ogawa training with Kurt Hennig to try and create a storyline of whether Ogawa would join the NWO, New Japan, or create his own group in 1998. To get that over as a possibility of an angle, supposedly Ogawa has ordered black judo ring wear for 1998, since black is the NWO color. It was also announced that Riki Choshu's final 5 matches, all on this show in order, would be 1 fall 20-minute time limit matches against, in order, Kazuyuki Fujita, Yutaka Yoshi, Tatsuhiro Takaiwa, Takashi Iizuka and finally Jushin Liger. Masahiro Chono did an angle before leaving for the US and Germany tour, saying that he wanted to sign contracts next year for both New Japan and NWO so he'd make double the money. There was some internal heat regarding Yuji Nagata losing cleanly to Disco Inferno on the December 15th Nitro. Since Nitro results are covered in Japan, Nagata, who is making his return at the Dome show for the match with Hiroyoshi Tenzan, lost to a guy who was most famous for losing to a woman on a pay-per-view. IWGP Heavyweight Champion Kensuke Sasaki and Junior Champ Otani are currently in Thailand, supposedly training at a Muay Thai dojo to unveil some Muay Thai moves and tactics added to their arsenal for the Dome show. New Japan has a December 23rd show at Korakuen Hall, which is the only show between now and the Dome. November 29th TV show did a 3.7 rating. Other Japan notes. Kingdom ran its biggest show to date on December 14th, selling out Tokyo Yoyogi Gym No. 2 with 3,800 fans for a show televised in a 2 a.m. time slot. The main event was supposed to be Hiromitsu Kanehara vs. Vale Tudo fighter Valide Ismail of Brazil. However, Ismail no-showed since he had a big Vale Tudo match in Sao Paulo 4 days earlier. So add into the list of fighters who have attempted and failed to do a double, win 2 major fights less than 1 week apart. The show was mainly Kingdom fighters against members of the Tank Abbott contingent. Abbott was there as a second and was interviewed on television running down Anjo. Anjo beat Masahito Kakihara in 351, while Abbott's crew went 0-3, as Larry Parker lost to Billy Scott in 218. Eddie Ruiz, best known for being KO'd in a street fight about 2 months back by Abbott in a Huntington Beach parking lot, lost to Kanehara in 349, and Paul Herrera lost to Kazushi Sakuraba in 148. Taka Michinoku returned as WWF Light Heavyweight Champion and will defend the title against regular tag partner Shoichi Funaki on December 18th at Korakuen Hall. Animal Hamaguchi held a major Christmas party to celebrate the 10th anniversary of his gym, with more than 600 people invited. Among those attending were pro wrestlers Michiyoshi Ohara, Satoshi Kojima, Takao Mori, Koki Kitahara, Yujiyasu Ryoka, Kyoko Inoue, Norio Onaga, and of course his daughter, who was a world amateur champion. Added to the multi-promotional Umanosuke Ueda benefit show on December 23rd at Korakuen Hall is a Kingdom match, Yoji Anjo, just 2 days after Ultimate, versus Masahito Kakihara, the Michinoku Tiger Mask versus his teacher Satoru Sayama, Great Kabuki and Daiko Kubo Benkei of IWA versus Shin FMW's Tarzan Goto and Katsutoshi Niyama, and the main event is now a New Japan singles match with Satoshi Kojima versus Hiroyoshi Tenzan. Ueda won't be able to attend the show because his physical condition is so bad stemming from his career-ending auto accident, So they are going to do a telephone hookup from the hospital in Kumamoto, Japan, where Ueda will talk with old rivals Antonio Inoki, Seiji Sakaguchi, and Animal Hamaguchi, all of whom will be at the show live. What has now been announced for FMW's major show of this tour on December 19th at Tokyo Komazawa Olympic Park Gym is a non-title match with champion Masato Tanaka vs Atsushi Onita, Jinsei Shinzaki and Hayabusa vs Yukihiro Kanemura, and Mr. Ganasuke, a three-way dance with Terry Funk, Sandman, and Bubba Ray Dudley, Tommy Dreamer vs Gladiator, Ricky Fuji vs Devon Dudley, Asia Kong vs Shark Tsuchiya, and Hiromichi Fuyuki and Gedo and Jado vs Haido and two mystery partners. Hisakatsu Oya left end for FMW, so he'll be on the babyface side in the feud. Koji Kiao has a work shoot on December 19th against a guy named Doug Fisher, and they appear to be building up a match with 640-pound sumo wrestler Emmanuel Yarbrough, famous for his being knocked down by Keith Hackney at UFC 3. Yarbrough is in Japan for a sumo tournament and challenged Kiao to a match. Rings on December 23rd in Fukuoka has the tournament semifinals with Kiyoshi Tamura vs Akira Maeda and Volkan vs Ilukine Mikhail, plus shoot matches with Ricardo Moraes vs Graham Zaza and Willie Peters vs Sean Alvarez, plus Masayuki Naruse vs Wataru Sakata and Chris Hazeman vs Tsuyoshi Kosaka. Tamura just came out with a book, and in the book Maeda viciously ripped the Pancrase promotion and also blamed Minoru Suzuki, Masakatsu Funaki and Yoji Anjo for an incident many years ago where a prospective wrestler died in the old UWF dojo. Even though Rings appears to be the most popular of the shoot-style promotions right now, some think Pancrase has the better future because far more young wrestlers are training at their dojo. The younger guys who want to be shooters are training either for Pancrase or Shudo, as I guess once they get to the point of wanting to be shooters, they figure out Rings is largely not a shoot. Big Japan is going to do an interpromotional angle with Onita's Zen Group, which will probably be shot on the December 19th FMW show, where Shoji Nakamaki will challenge Onita. Nakamaki was years ago a protege of Onita in the FMW before leaving and becoming something of a sicko star with other brutal indies. This was pretty much hinted at as Big Japan held its third anniversary party on December 15th, showing their new singles, tag team and junior heavyweight titles that will be fought for in 1998. Kojika and Nakamaki talked about an Onita-Nakamaki feud. Seiji Sakaguchi was at the party. Frequent observer contributor Tadashi Tanaka's book largely covering K1, Pancrase, Rings, UFC, ECW and Michinoku wrestling, along with talking about the year in US wrestling, was released in Japan on December 5th. JWP is running a major show in conjunction with AJW on December 26th at Korakuen Hall with Dynamite Kansai vs Mayumi Ozaki, Cutie Suzuki and Devil Masami vs Manami Toyota and Hikari Fukuoka, and Yumiko Hata and Tomoko Miyaguchi vs Takako Inoue and Commando Borishoi. Here and there. The investors in the now defunct XL Sports, USWA Selker Group, have filed an individual $1.4 million lawsuit against Jerry Lawler in Memphis, claiming he conspired to con the investment group out of money by misrepresenting the value of the company. Claiming he misrepresented to them the price he paid to acquire the other 50% of the company from Jerry Jarrett. Lawler paid approximately $250,000 to Jarrett for 50% of the USWA, of which Jarrett received about $175,000, and Larry Burton, or Bergman or Bertman or whatever name he's going by this week, received the difference as a brokering fee for putting the deal together. Lawler and Burton then sold the Selker Group 55% of the USWA for $1.1 million. There are also hints of the Selkers filing an individual suit against Burton and filing criminal fraud charges, although those threats were also out there a few months back, and nothing materialized. This was the second similar lawsuit filed by the group. The first against Lawler and Burton was looking to obtain control of the promotion, but it was dropped and the promotion officially declared bankruptcy. The investment group then filed suit to get its money back. Rip Tyler, who wrestled as a tag team partner with Eddie Sullivan in both the United States and Japan during the early 70s, passed away about 2 weeks ago at the age of 57. We don't have any other details, although Tyler started his wrestling career around 1964 and was a frequent visitor to Japan for the old Iway promotion in the early and mid-70s. Lineup for the CWA's mega event on December 20th in Bremen, Germany is Marshall Duke Dries, defending the CWA title against Wayne Clearman. Crusher Klein from Ohio, real name Wayne Kreiderman, a former wrestler at Mount Allison University in Ontario and was Canadian national heavyweight champion as a senior and current trainer at Al Snow's Body Slammers Gym. Savio Vega vs. Ulf Herman, a boxing match with Ludwig Borga vs. Tony Richards, Masahiro Chono vs. Christian Eckstein, Ice Train vs. Cannonball Grizzly, Doug Gilbert vs. Franz Schumann and Osamu Nishimura, and Tony St. Clair vs. Rhino Richards and Robbie Brookside. USA Today reported last week that 3 college wrestlers in the past 6 weeks have died trying to make preseason weigh-ins. The most recent, Jeff Reese, a junior at the University of Michigan, collapsed trying to make weight for his first meet of the season. In the previous 6 weeks, 2 other wrestlers died trying to make weight to get into lower weight divisions. There are weekly shows in Houston at the 1,500-seat Arena Colonial every Tuesday night using lucha talent under the banner of the Latin Wrestling Federation. Apparently they've been drawing well of late, including frequent sellouts, including on December 9th with El Hijo del Santo and Antifaz del Norte headlining against Negro Casas and Mosco de la Merced, and Tarzan Boy beating Javier Flores in a hair match. They are bringing in 5 or 6 wrestlers every week from Mexico to work the top of the show. Music City Wrestling's Christmas show in Nashville will be headlined by PG-13 vs. Flash Flanagan and Terry Golden, Colorado Kid vs. Frenchie Riviera in a hair match, and Rex King vs. Stephen Dunn in a street fight. Stefan Haupt is running a show on January 17th in Hanover, Germany with a one-night tournament including Michael Kovacs, Miles Zerno, and David Morgan. On February 15th, he is bringing in Sabu, Rob Van Dam, Mikey Whipwreck, Dirt Bike Kid, Franz Schumann, and Ulf Herman. NAWA has its Christmas show on December 20th in White, Georgia with Demolition Axe vs. Barry Darso, former tag team partners as Demolition. For more info call 706-468-9215, and if you mention The Observer you get $1 off at the door. New England Sports Network is doing a show on woman wrestler Brittany Brown. NWA on December 27th in Mount Holly, New Jersey at the National Guard Armory has Sonny and Sal Sincere. NHB. The major show of the week was December 10th in Sao Paulo, Brazil, where Valide Ismail 6-1 beat Joel de Oliveira 9-3-1 in a battle of lighter weight Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu versus Luta Livre fighters in 9:48 when de Oliveira tapped out. The Pedro Otavio won a 4-man heavyweight tournament in another marathon, winning a first-round match in 18 minutes and a decision in the finals after going 30 minutes. Former U.S. Greco-Roman Olympic team member Dennis Hall has his first NHB match on January 17th for the Shudo promotion in Japan facing Noboru Asahi. Hall lost via decision on the IWF pay-per-view show to João Roque. ECW. It was a largely uneventful weekend with shows on December 11th in Rochester, New York drawing about 790, December 12th in Jamestown, New York drawing about 538, and December 13th in Buffalo, New York drawing about $1,730,000. The future of Stevie Richards with this group is already in question as he missed the entire weekend. The story we were given is that Richards on December 9th got a physical from his doctor in Philadelphia who told him that his neck hadn't improved at all from his layoff, and the doctor recommended that he not wrestle. There is probably more to the story as there was heat from the previous weekend with Richards and some of the other ECW wrestlers already. Sabu missed the first 2 nights with a broken jaw suffered in the accident the previous weekend, but did work the TV tapings in Buffalo. The next ECW arena dates are January 10th and January 31st. The latter will be called Midnight Madness and start at 9 p.m. with the plan that the main event will start around midnight. ECW debuts on January 2nd in Inkster, Michigan and January 4th in Indianapolis and the old Tyndall Armory, the same building Dick the Bruiser used to run. Al Snow continues to get over big with a head gimmick and doing the inside interviews. On television, he was going crazy complaining about not getting a push in the WWF and said that he was told by WWF officials all he had to do to get a push was to give us a little head, but then told his pet head that he'd never give him away. Aaron O'Grady is already gone. He was planning on living in the dojo, but got kicked out over not helping set up buildings at an indie show put on by Bam Bam Bigelow, and things got worse from there. Chris Condito suffered some sort of an elbow injury in Buffalo. In Jamestown, since that was the city of a famous deal where there was a highly publicized incident of a guy infecting dozens of local women with AIDS, they had a very tame show with no blood. In Buffalo, they did an angle which ended with Mikey Whipwreck out with a knee injury courtesy of Justin Credible. They stopped the show for 10 minutes to make the deal look like a shoot and heat up the feud. Great Sasuke will be in to work with Credible Christmas week and finally on January 10th at the arena. Pit Bulls worked the weekend, but this may be it for them, because Pit Bull number 2 faced Chris Chetty and vowed that if he didn't win, the Pit Bulls would never wrestle in ECW again, and they lost. They also did an angle where Rob Van Dam injured Tommy Rogers. Sabu and Sandman had a death match said to be tons better than their pay-per-view match in Buffalo. With the main crew in Japan, The next domestic show will be December 26th in Queens, New York. The heat at the December 6th ECW Arena show was the best in months, and judging from the matches that aired, it was also a far better show than the pay-per-view. In particular, the Triangle Tag Condito and Lance Storm winning the belts from Furnace and La Fawn and also beating Axel and Balls was a good match, and Credible vs. Whipwreck was better than their pay-per-view match. They are once again working to get the pay-per-view starting time on March 1st moved up from 9 p.m. to 7 p.m., the same starting time as WWF and WCW. WCW. Apparently Ric Flair hadn't really recovered from his ankle injury because he only did a 17 seconds match with Curt Hennig on Nitro, which ended with the NWO attacking him and him getting carried out again. As said before, when Flair was injured in the War Games match, it was handled great and he came back hotter than ever. But since his comeback, we've now seen 2 more injuries and him not beating anyone in the interim. More than anything else, the constant portrayal of injuries is going to make him look like an old man who keeps getting hurt every time he tries to come back, which is not what anyone wants to see from Flair at this stage of the game. If he wasn't ready to return, he should have been doing interviews only and not build for Starrcade. Diamond Dallas Page will take Flair's spot at Starrcade in the US title match against Hennig, which apparently was always the plan, as it was known all along Flair wasn't going to be ready by then. If so, why was he advertised in the first place? I don't know if it'll be a cage match, but if it isn't, why did they push it as a cage match in the first place? As best we can tell, the plan is for Nitro to remain as it is on Mondays, as in why mess with a successful formula, and the new formula show will be NWO Thunder on Thursdays. Being that this is 90s wrestling, nothing is for sure until it happens, including Sting winning the title, although Hogan not doing the job on this show, and he has the contractual right not to, which means he's going to hold the company up for whatever he can get. After all, this build-up would let a lot of the air out of the Sting balloon. December 15th, Nitro drew a sellout 9,320 fans, 8,499 paying $146,425 to the Independence Arena in Charlotte. The show opened with a dark match as the American Patriots Curtis Chip the Firebreaker Thompson and Todd Champion aka Todd Bradford, returning beating the Samoan SWAT team, billed as Samu and Fatu, although it was the original Samu and the Fatu was Sam Fatu, better known as Samoan Savage and Tonga Kid. All reports are that this match wasn't good, so that should pretty well guarantee they get signed. The Samoans are likely in due to Hogan, who apparently has some sort of indebtedness from the past to UFA. TV started with the NWO group interview, which included Masahiro Chono, who said a few words in Japanese and never came back out again. Why they even bothered using him when they had nothing for him to do is another question, but I've already run out of my quota of questions regarding Nitro. Ray Traylor pinned Vincent in 150 with the Bubba Slam, now called the Trailer Park Trash. Disco Inferno retained the TV title, pinning Yuji Nagata in 431 with the Stunner, or Chart Buster. Nagata was clearly not used to standing there waiting for Disco to get there for his offensive moves, but they worked together better than one would think. David Finlay pinned Dean Malenko in 602 with a tombstone when Eddie Guerrero distracted Malenko. This match wasn't nearly as good as you'd think. Guerrero got another shot at doing color commentary and didn't do well again. The reason Guerrero continually brings up Malenko's reactions about his wife being pregnant is because she's about to give birth. Rey Mysterio Jr. and Juventud Guerrera beat La Parca and Psicosis in a match that blew away everything on either show when Guerrera pinned Psicosis after a Firebird 450 splash. Mysterio Jr. and Guerrera remind me a lot of Santo and Octagon. It's a small underdog babyface team when it comes to charisma. Obviously they are a better working team, but Santo and Octagon was one of the best pure babyface teams of this decade. The other team they've got the potential to be like, although again they are far better workers, is the Rock and Roll Express of the 80s, and actually Parca and Psicosis have the talent to be their Midnight Express counterpart, but they're lacking the great talking manager to get the whole deal over. Anyway, they did so well that it probably means we won't be seeing them as a team much in the future. Mysterio Jr. did a springboard into a flip into a Hurricane Rana on the floor on Parca at the finish. Arn Anderson came on to a huge ovation, and he broke down at the reaction, saying the wrestling ring is the only place in his adult life that he felt at home in. The Charlotte Observer had run a positive story that day on Anderson talking about his career-ending injury. I can't figure out why there isn't a place on camera for someone who can talk that well. Granted, it'd be hard at this stage for him to be a heel manager and he can't take bumps, but guys who have his talents and presence at the mic in this business can be counted on about 3 or 4 fingers, and it's a shame not to find a spot for someone like that.
Ric Flair also came out and they presented a check for $15,000 for a memorial for slain police officers in Charlotte.
J.J. Dillon and Eric Bischoff had a confrontation where Bischoff demanded that punches and kicks count in the Zbyszko match, but Dillon said then submissions also had to count.
Someone explained that logically. That made even less sense than the time a few weeks back on Raw when Jim Ross was putting over Shamrock by saying he had made Brett and Shawn tap out, and Lawler said that what does tapping out have to do with wrestling?
Scott Hall pinned Chris Jericho with the edge in 2:32. Should have been longer and more competitive. Steve McMichael was supposed to wrestle Meng. Thankfully that never happened. Bill Goldberg laid out McMichael before the match. J.J. Dillon then ordered Goldberg to take the match with Meng. Goldberg got a big reaction even though he hasn't been on TV much due to his injury the past few weeks. In the aisle, McMichael jumped him and they had a pull apart. For some reason no match ever took place. Steiners kept the tag titles beating Conan and Scott Norton in 3:57 via DQ when Vincent interfered. They did a 3-on-2 until Trailer made the save. Scott Steiner got a haircut shearing all of his trademark long locks. Randy Savage pinned Booker T in 6:47. Crowd was starting to burn out at this point and match wasn't as good as you'd think. Chris Benoit, who is losing steam in this prelim feud, beat Scotty Riggs with the crossface in 4:38 of a good match. Raven once again wasn't there. Dillon and Bischoff had another confrontation ending up with them arguing over a ref. Bischoff suggested Nash or Six but Dillon said no. Dillon suggested Randy Anderson or Scott Dickinson but Bischoff said no because he didn't want a fat man refereeing because he's too fast. Dillon said he'd pick an NWO member to ref and said Bret Hart. Hart came out to a surprisingly big pop, although the way the segment set him up he was bound to get the pop, and he mentioned it was Ric Flair country which kept the crowd on his side. He said he wasn't going to be biased because he knew what it was like to get screwed by a ref, which actually got the biggest pop of all. Bischoff offered him $7.5 million per year and weekends off of Ted's money. Explain why it would be Ted's money if this was an outsider renegade group trying to destroy Ted Company? To join. Since Bret doesn't want to be called a sellout, naturally he'll be turning that one down. A lot of people thought Hart should have done a lot more in his first appearance, but they couldn't do too much without him not tipping his hand more and ruining the speculation angle for Starrcade of what he's going to end up doing. Really, his first appearance probably should have been at Starrcade as the ref, keeping the whole deal a mystery until he did whatever he's going to do at the climactic point of the match. But since WWF had been drawing ratings with his name, WCW wanted to get him on the air. Marcus Bagwell beat Lex Luger via an over-the-top rope DQ in 2:08. Nothing much again, although Bagwell is on the verge of taking a major step up the ladder with this program. Flair beat Hennig in only 17 seconds when the entire NWO interfered. Before the match, Hennig gave a promo that went nowhere fast. Flair gave everyone low blows until there were too many and he was destroyed until Luger, Page and the Steiners came out for the save. Fans were hitting the ring at this point. Sting was in the rafters, and then after lights going on the WCW sign. The show ended with Sting charging the ring. The show was supposed to finish with the Angle, which did take place in the building after the show ended, where Sting laid every member of the NWO with scorpion death drops except Hogan and Bischoff, who escaped unscathed. Sting actually got a larger pop in Charlotte than Flair. Because so many fans were hitting the ring, they ran out of time and Sting didn't make it in the ring on time. When Bischoff in the ring realized the Angle was blown, he, or someone else in the ring, very audibly swore, and then Bischoff totally freaked out in the ring, not realizing that there was a live mic picking it up and it went over the air since there is no 7-second delay. He had his head in his hands when the camera came back on him after the swearing and acknowledgement that the Angle was blown. Considering knowledge of the media stories coming out, and his attempt to portray WCW as something different from WWF, hence the directive to the wrestlers to clean up the product, that probably explains his noticeable reaction. During the show they plugged a cruiserweight title match with Guerrero defending against Dragon, and for whatever reason with no explanation, the match never took place. Wrath's actual injuries from being rear-ended coming back from the Pillman benefit show on December 6 were a fractured collarbone, some stitches and a bruised sternum. Oleg Toktarov's agent called WCW and told them that the WWF was strongly after Toktarov. As best we can tell, there was no interest by the WWF in Toktarov, so it was a negotiating ploy. I don't sense any real interest by WCW, although figure that at some point in 1998 that Don Frye and Brian Johnston will be in. Bischoff signed a 4-year contract extension. Expect a mask versus mask feud with Mortis against Juventud Guerrera ending with Juventud sans mask.
At the show in Buffalo, when the lights went out during the Savage vs. Hugh Morris match, the reason they were out for so long is because Bruce Smith and Jim Kelly hopped the rail and attacked Savage, and WCW security had to grab them and get them out of there before the lights went back on.
I've heard this was an angle set up by Savage, Smith and Kelly as a rib on security, although others say that Smith and Kelly were just totally out of control by that point in the show.
Later on the Buffalo show during a commercial break, a fan got into the ring going after Scott Hall, but Randy Anderson cut him off and kneed him low and snatched him.
Anderson stopped a fan on camera in Charlotte as well. Anderson was actually a great high school wrestler about 20 years ago, and the WCW refs are getting their own UFC training every week it seems.
Roddy Piper has been out filming the final episode of the network run of Walker, Texas Ranger.
The part he plays is of a pro wrestler nearing retirement. The part was actually written for Hulk Hogan to play. Jacqueline is gone as her contract expired and they decided against renewing it. She was telling people she was going to tighten to feud with China, which may be the case, but in this environment, even if it isn't, is what you tell your current employer when your contract is running out.
Sold out on January 24th in Dayton, Ohio really is sold out. They sold all 4,383 tickets for $115,260. The first hour tickets went on sale over the weekend. Nitro on January 26th in Fort Wayne, Indiana did 4,000 tickets and $103,000 the first day.
PBS turned down making Shadow Warriors a weekly television series starring Hulk Hogan.
The show was to be based on the Escape from Devil's Island movie that did so well in the ratings on TNT. Even though Bischoff is a good performer in his role and has a major match coming at the pay-per-view, the idea of him running out 4 different times on Nitro is bad on a lot of levels.
With so many quality wrestlers not able to get any air time, let alone interview time, it's a morale killer at best. The charges of an ego being out of control are going to naturally be everywhere. On the December 15th Monday Night Football game, after Kevin Green returned a fumble for a touchdown, they showed a video clip of his match with Steve McMichael from earlier this year, although WCW was never mentioned. After the death of Brian Pillman, WCW tested about a dozen undercard wrestlers. About 30% failed, none were suspended, but all were made to go to a one-day-long counseling session. One would think a sampling of undercard guys bringing back that many positives would result in a company-wide testing, but the top guys in this company simply aren't going to get tested. Hey, that's probably 10 or 12 more guys than the WWF has tested since the Pillman death, and it isn't like either group is the clean one or without its problems. Aside from Nitro, the only shows of the past week were the Saturday night tapings on December 9th in Erie, Pennsylvania before 2,143 paying $45,472 and December 16th in Gainesville, Georgia before a sellout 1,800 with it selling out one day in advance. In Erie, Nagata got his win back from Prince Aokia. Malenko beat Guerrera. Benoit pinned Finlay clean. TV main saw trailer over Hennig via DQ. For the Saturday show of this coming week, the main event has another Bagwell over Luger via DQ finish. Gainesville was said to be a hot show, taped for December 27th and January 3rd. On December 27th, Malenko beat Parka in a great match, and after the bout Guerrero hit both men with a chair. Goldberg beat Renegade in 9 seconds with a pull-apart with McMichael afterwards that had a ton of heat. Ultimo Dragon beat Psychosis in a real good match. Guerrero beat Mysterio Jr. in a 4 stars match said to be the best on the show. Hennig beat Bobby Eaton in a U.S. title bout, and Page stole the belt during the match. This may explain something for later. Benoit beat Saturn via DQ when the Nest interfered. It was a toned-down match, although Saturn did a plancha. Benoit was destroying the Nest until cut off by one of the worst clotheslines you'll ever see from Hammer, and then put in the rings of Saturn. Booker T pinned Yuji Nagata. Steiners beat Public Enemy to keep tag titles. TV main saw Hall DDQ trailer with Steiners and several NWO members doing a run-in and brawl at the end of the show. For January 3rd, Meng beat Eaton, and Meng also laid out Bobby Walker and Teddy Long. Jericho beat Evan Courageous. Condon beat Norman Smiley. Mortis beat Juventud Guerrera in what was said to have been a great match. McMichael beat Louis Spicolli. Finlay pinned Walker. Disco kept the TV belt, beating Brad Armstrong. Hugh Morris and the team of Barry Darsow and John Noor won squashes. TV main was Page versus Hennig. Page came out with the US belt, which may indicate a title change at Starrcade, although you never know for sure. Typical NWO run-in DQ, but Page gave the cutter to several of them before escaping into the crowd. This match may not be airable because there was so much dry ice in the building by this time the whole place for half the match was engulfed in a fog-like state. Weekend rating saw Pro at 1.2 and Saturday night at 2.0. WWF.
Thus far for the Royal Rumble on January 18th in San Jose, besides the 30-man deal, are Shawn Michaels vs. Undertaker in a casket match for the title. You can almost count on Kane screwing Undertaker in this one to lead to their Mania match. Rocky Maivia vs. Ken Shamrock for the IC title.
The New Age Outlaws, new name for Billy Gunn and Jesse Jam, vs. LOD for the tag titles. Vader vs. Goldust in a minis match with Max Mini Rey Mysterio Jr., and Nova, Mascarada Sagrada and ex-Octagonchito vs. Torito Espectrito aka Mini Vader, and Battalion, Tito Morgan, and ex-Espectrito 2 aka Mini Mankind.
The advance as of press time was 8,865 tickets and $272,465, so the building is a little more than half sold out.
Raw taping for December 22nd was on December 11th in Lowell, Massachusetts. Before Raw started, they had Steve Blackman over Brian Walsh, Recon and Sniper over Matt and Jeff Hardy, Flash Funk beat Farouk. Headbangers beat Savio Vega and Miguel Perez via DQ when Jose and Jesus interfered, and Skull and 8-Ball made the save. Mark Henry beat Sultan and Tom Brandy, now getting a push for a feud with Mero over Sable, beat Barry Houston.
Raw opened with a DX interview with Michaels hyping a match against Undertaker at Rumble, and I'm told Triple H hyping a match against Owen, although I was later told that Owen vs. Triple H won't take place at the Rumble.
They took off their robes down to their Speedos. Slaughter came out and told Michaels he hadn't defended the European title in 60 days and he was ordering him to face Triple H later that show. Mosh beat Henry Godwin via DQ when Phineas interfered, and they ended up pulling out belts and whipping bangers to lead to the whipping matches at the arenas.
In a non-title bout, Undertaker NC Maivia when Kane attacked Taker.
Taker again wouldn't hit Kane back.
Taker was about to give Maivia the tombstone when Kane hit the ring.
Michaels was to wrestle Triple H, but Owen jumped Triple H in the aisle, so the bout was postponed until later in the show. Mero beat Scott Taylor.
Mero has Sable come out in a reindeer outfit, but she talked it off, revealing very little, and Mero freaked out.
Kurgan beat 8-Ball. Afterwards, the Truth Commission beat on 8-Ball until Skull came out with a 2x4 to clear the ring Duggan style. Shamrock beat D'Lo Brown. Maivia challenged Shamrock to a match at Rumble, but and Farouk got mad at him for doing it. Goldust and Luna came out and read "'Twas the Night Before Christmas."
Santa Claus came out and attacked Goldust, and of course it ended up being Vader.
Triple H beat Michaels in the main event farce. Show ended with a very fast stud casket match with Taker over Triple H. After the match, Michaels saw a woman with a sign that said, "Sean, let's put the X in sex." Michaels told her to lift up her shirt, which she did to a big pop. Weekend ratings saw Live Wire at 1.5 and Superstars at 1.9.
Preliminary estimates of the buy rate for D-Generation X have hovered between 0.39 and 0.50, which is roughly the same or slightly ahead when it comes to number of buys, and with a $10 higher price tag, so taking in tons more money than the December show last year,
but down significantly as in 40 to 55% from the November show. Goldust is going to be known as the artist formerly known as Goldust. Vince McMahon was set on television to have apologized to Steve Austin, thus already softening the villain deal. November 29th Raw at Nassau Coliseum is already sold out with 10,182 tickets sold for $251,122.
Undertaker missed the December 6th show in Providence, Rhode Island because his blood pressure was too high, and he's been working nightly on a bad hip, which explains why his matches are being kept short.
In addition, his father is in bad health, so he's had a lot of problems to deal with. Dude Love's fractured rib came from the bump he took flying off the stage onto a table at the December 9th tapings in Durham, New Hampshire. Chains also had a family death but was back in action after missing only 2 midweek dates. Austin has another doctor's appointment in January, and they are hopeful he'll be ruled okay and be able to work singles matches and a regular schedule. He was off the road completely after television Thursday.
WWF is putting together a wrestling camp from January 3rd to January 12th at the offices in Stamford, Connecticut, where Dory Funk, Pat Patterson, and Tom Pritchard will tutor some of the younger wrestlers, basically on teaching the really green guys to do a few moves that look good and incorporate them into a match, and try and add some storytelling abilities to some of the more experienced guys.
Among those expected to be at the camp include Mark Mero, Ahmed Johnson, Robert Millay, Kurgan the Interrogator, Mark Henry, Ahim Albrecht, Brackus, Darren Drostoff, a former Buffalo Bills football player under contract who hasn't started wrestling yet, Steve Blackman, Randy Blackbeard, and Adam Copeland. There is talk of a few others possibly being there, but no names are confirmed. Mark Robinson, a sumo wrestler from South Africa who is currently in Japan in a major tournament, was quoted in the Japanese media saying that he had agreed to join the WWF in 1998.
Robinson is 310 pounds and was the African sumo champion, whatever that means.
WWF is now expecting that Dan Severn will be signing a contract.
The sides have apparently agreed to both money terms and storylines, and Severn was given a contract but he hasn't returned it yet.
The contract would allow him to continue doing NHB provided Titan agrees to the matches as well. They are going to have a new IC belt made. Johnny Ace at a meeting. He expressed no interest in leaving All Japan, but expressed interest in working dates in between tours. There is some heat on Sunny for remarks she's made publicly, basically saying the WWF made a mistake in getting rid of Bret Hart and also saying that her suggestion to improving the WWF would be to get rid of every wrestler who weighs more than 300 pounds. Business this week saw the Raw tapings on December 9th in Durham, New Hampshire draw a sellout $5,511 and $69,808. December 10th in Bangor, Maine drew $3,709 and $65,229. Raw tapings on December 11th in Lowell, Massachusetts drew a sellout $2,403 and $47,096. December 12th in Chattanooga drew $6,855 and $102,899. December 13th in Nashville drew $5,345 and $93,934. December 14th in Memphis drew $5,078 and $72,973, and December 15th in Little Rock drew $6,449 and $109,883. Little Rock is the final show before a double shot on December 26th in Milwaukee and Chicago. Merchandise for the week was $245,000, so that was $6.91 per head. January 10th in Madison Square Garden will be Undertaker and Austin vs. Michaels and Helmsley in a cage match. Maivia vs. Shamrock for the IC title. Vader vs. Goldust, Gunn and Jam vs. LOD, Love vs. Jarrett, Taka Defense vs. Christopher. Godwins vs. Bangers whipping match. Tom Brady vs. Mero and Kane vs. Chains. Most of the house shows in early January will have that same tag match on top, since Undertaker and Austin and Michaels are working injured. LOD's hiatus will only be for a few weeks, as they'll be back on the road the first week of 1997, which was not as long as it was originally planned on being.
Among the items teased at television were an eventual feud between Maivia and Farouk over the leadership of the Nation of Domination, and an apparent adding of the New Age Outlaws to the DX group.
January 16th in Anaheim, California has Undertaker and Austin vs. Michaels and Triple H, Maivia vs. Shamrock for IC title. Vader vs. Goldust, Outlaws defending vs. LOD, Love vs. Jarrett, Skull and 8-Ball vs. Miguel and Sabio, Taka vs. Christopher, 6 Minis, Mero vs. Brandy and Kane vs. Chains. Some notes from the Durham taping. Maivia is doing a great job as a new heel. Lawler looked positively ancient next to Taka. Mark Henry has improved immensely since we last saw him and looks to have dropped about 40 pounds, although being able to walk and chew gum at the same time would have been an immense improvement. If he's going to make it, it's as a heel getting heat for the strongest man shtick. Fans are far too sophisticated to buy Henry, having bombed out in the Olympics and whose so-called record-setting powerlifting marks are well below those of Doug Furness despite having a 150-pound bodyweight edge, as the strongest man in the world. At this point he has no charisma, and that bear hug finisher, even with him being legitimately very strong, is 25 years behind the times, but they've got millions invested in him, so they will do everything to make it work.
Owen Hart was great in his new role, and it'll be the biggest break of his career.
Michaels and Triple H actually carried LOD to a good match in the television main, and the angle where Hawk got part of his head shaved was a really strong angle. The readers' pages. HIV. It has now been proven that the AIDS virus can be transmitted by fighting. A man with HIV and hepatitis headbutted another man who was wearing metal eyeglasses, drawing blood. He developed the HIV infection, and hepatitis B tests showed that the HIV virus came from the other man. See the November 8th issue of Lancet, available in science or medical libraries, page 1370. It is obvious that a double juice pro wrestling match poses a similar risk. HIV takes years to cause AIDS. A single infected wrestler in a blood-oriented promotion could infect everyone in the promotion before anyone would ever even realize anything was wrong. It is unlikely that blading will be abandoned in pro wrestling, however steps could and need to be taken to reduce the risk. 1. All wrestlers, whether they blade or not, should be vaccinated against hepatitis B. Unlike HIV, it is highly contagious. 2. Wrestlers who blade should be tested for HIV frequently. Anyone with HIV should never blade unless treatment has reduced HIV to undetectable levels. 3. The most risky multiple juice matches should be minimized. 4. Wrestlers should never blade a spot that has someone else's blood on it and should wipe off areas likely to be scraped, such as elbows. 5. Blades should never be shared. 6. Wrestlers should avoid contact of a cut with blood from another person, both by being aware of where they bladed and by blading in out-of-the-way places such as above the ear instead of the forehead. 7. The possibility of substituting either makeup or special effects techniques for at least some of the blood in wrestling should be investigated. 8. Wrestlers who never blade or bleed in their matches have little to worry about as long as they follow standard safety precautions, never share needles and practice safe sex, always using a condom. Bobby Baum. Bethesda, Maryland.
Response from Dave Meltzer: Unfortunately, I don't believe anything is going to stop the current practices in the wrestling groups that favor the blade until a wrestler is infected with HIV from a bloody match, at which point it will be too late.
We've had warning from doctors, including one noted epidemiologist over the years in the letters pages, and, like this letter, it has all basically gone ignored.
And on the other side, during the mid-80s there was a lot of blading going on in wrestling and a lot of unsafe sex, and the predicted epidemic never transpired, which makes the wrestlers of the 90s feeling a lot more invulnerable to these warnings.
Double cross. Vince McMahon's only mistake was in being stubborn and insisting that Bret Hart lose to Shawn Michaels. The Survivor Series could have had Ken Shamrock laying out Michaels, then subbing for him in the title match and beating Hart for the belt, assuming Hart okayed dropping it to anyone but Michaels.
No way could McMahon allow Hart to take the belt and waltz onto Nitro, saying he was going to unify both belts while setting ratings records in the process.
Hart is now a millionaire. He got to spit in McMahon's face, got to punch him out, and he doesn't have to be teased by Michaels anymore. And he can bellyache for the rest of his life about being cheated. How come he couldn't get McMahon to allow him to drop the title to Shamrock?
Did he really want to lose it as you claim?
WCW has that awesome talent roster as opposed to McMahon's crummy one, but the WCW target audience is suburban dolts. With the original Shotgun Saturday Night, McMahon actually brought WWF rings into New York City nightclubs for us urban dolts. The WCW dream audience is suburban retirees clapping on cue while they rest up from standing in line at Disney World. Eric Bischoff is a power freak and could give a crap about anything else, wrestling included. He gives himself more airtime every week than Chris Benoit and all the Japanese and Mexican wrestlers combined. Who is America wants to see Bischoff on television except Bischoff? I love his roster. Nitro kicks ass. But the average age of his announcers is older than Lou Thez.
Am I married to Tony Schiavone? Can't they have at least one announcer born after World War II?
Maybe I'm just jealous of people like Ted Turner and Bischoff. Maybe McMahon is too at this point. Maybe the key phrase in your excellent December 1st summation was when you pointed out that the scenario chosen was the best one for television ratings. Maybe on Mondays we are witnessing television starting to eat pro wrestling the same way TV has devoured American politics, popular entertainment, and my attention span. Alan Wunsch. New York, New York.
It's amazing that three great issues could arrive in such close proximity to each other: the one on Fritz von Erich's death, Brian Pillman, and the Bret Hart double cross.
The November 17th issue was tremendous.
The attention to detail and the follow-ups on the story is something lacking in the mainstream media, let alone for a pro wrestling publication.
There was no need to editorialize on the subject as the facts themselves said everything that needed to be said about Vince McMahon and his questionable character. Let's look at the main principles in this saga. Both Shawn Michaels and Earl Hebner are employees of McMahon.
They had their jobs to consider.
Furthermore, Michaels should look out for himself based on how he has been screwed in the past. Ultimately, Hart will come out of this as the winner. He has a great deal in WCW and will forever be known for being double-crossed. Could become the safety valve champion in WCW if Sting fails, just as he was in the WWF. Also, he's something of a folk hero to the wrestlers in both promotions.
You can see McMahon's side. I doubt Hart would have shown up on Nitro with the WWF belt, but Eric Bischoff would have loved to announce that the WWF champion was headed to WCW.
Additionally, Michaels is the far better worker at this stage and his heat and persona fits in more with the direction the company is taking. It also looks like the WWF may be using this as a creative impetus toward new angles sorely lacking in an injury-laden stale promotion. However, it is also obvious McMahon is the main heel in this scenario. He lied to the most loyal performer and most consistent worker in the history of his company. His interview on Raw only made it worse.
Was he admitting that this is a work sport?
There is nothing worse in the long run than when someone tells a bunch of pseudo-truths under the guise of being completely honest. C. Marv Albert. You remarked how the WWF is far from crumbling on the reality side. But the public's perception may be different, and this is a business built on perception. McMahon built his entire empire on perception.
Remember the story? Wrestling never drew before McMahon came along.
It was only held in smoke-filled little halls, and it was never on network television. Ian Goodwin, Brooklyn, New York. Nash. I've got to say I'm a little surprised at what seems like willful disingenuity on the part of some of your readers regarding Kevin Nash. Or maybe I'm a little on the cynical side. The wrestling business is part of show business. And that's a lot like any other business. Within any and all of them, there are always going to be people who pursue their own interests at the cost of the so-called good of the business.
Certainly at the expense of others, who may be more talented or more deserving. Some of us might not deem this morally or ethically desirable, but I think most of us who have any sort of experience at any sort of workplace could recognize it as something akin to universal human nature.
I've personally dealt with what I think are Kevin Nash types and Eric Bischoff types in my working experience, both inside and outside the entertainment business. I don't like it. I don't like them. But the realities are people like this exist in strong positions and look after themselves and their friends. I find it difficult to believe that the people writing into the Observer displaying shock and horror at the injustices perpetrated by Nash have never witnessed or experienced more or less the equivalent type of experience themselves. If not, I'd love to be working where they are working.
This is not meant to excuse or act as a defense to the gentleman, nor that they'd either welcome or require one, simply to point out what goes on within WCW represents absolutely nothing new under the sun.
The most charitable light to put the deal under is that Kevin Nash must be one hell of a negotiator. The fact he's doing so under very favorable conditions doesn't detract from that achievement, and it's not up to me to speculate who can and can't look at themselves in the mirror in the morning. Second, allow me to address the letter of reader John Cashmere in the October 27th issue.
If the Wrestling Observer newsletter was ever a pro wrestling results and gossip sheet, which I tend to doubt, that certainly hasn't been the case for many years now. For virtually the entire time I've been a reader, which must be more than 7 years, the Observer has functioned as the pro wrestling industry's trade paper and as its newspaper of record. Few other specialty publications can claim to be both the New York Times and the Variety equivalents in their field, but the Observer is not only by default, but because it deserves to be. In the case of both quality broadsheet newspapers and trade papers within the entertainment industry, it is an established convention to publish extensive obituaries on relevant notables who have passed on. The extensive detail in the Fritz von Erich story is the result of the knowledge that nobody else was equipped to do the job properly. I'm more than mildly fascinated that any reader could have failed to notice just how gripping the story was, but I guess reading skills and attention spans ain't what they used to be. Not to cut the Observer out of subscriptions, but if any readers are of the same opinion as John Cashmere as it regards the Fritz von Erich story, there are around 137 gazillion internet pages that would suit their more narrow-focused wrestling needs a lot better than the Observer. The Fritz von Erich and Brian Pillman obits are the most obvious examples of why I continue to be a committed reader. Finally, let me comment on one of the few times I disagree with a Meltzer statistical analysis. The quarter-by-quarter ratings fluctuations compiled in the October 27th Observer. You yourself raised some possibilities of what might be called a logistical nature as to why figures from quarter hour to quarter hour may vary other than the viewer drawing ability of the wrestlers on the tube at the time. I just think there are far too many variables, such as programming on all the other channels in these time slots, social activities outside of television on Monday nights during the time periods to make any kind of definitive claims for the statistical tables under the circumstances. The other thing that raises an eyebrow are the actual results. There are just too many obvious anomalies. Disco Inferno, Chris Jericho and Alex Wright are turn-ons. Scott Hall is the major turn-off. Ultimo Dragon and Hector Garza are significant turnoffs, yet the talk on the street is that the WCW Monday Night Show is preferred because of the superior and faster-paced wrestling. Something's not quite kosher here. There may be a valid analysis to be drawn from quarter-by-quarter ratings, but I have the greatest difficulty believing this is the one. Not just yet, anyway. Maybe it requires a more extended period of analysis to come up with a valid conclusion. More exterior factors need to be included in the analysis. Whatever. I don't think this an ironclad gauge of a wrestler's ratings effectiveness just yet. Normally statistical analyses in the Observer are both accurate and complete, but I have to regard this one as the exception. The two funniest things on Nitro lately that didn't involve Nitro girls of Jacqueline falling out of their tops, Steve Regal visibly breaking up during a heroic but doomed attempt to have something resembling a wrestling match with the aptly named Mongo McMichael. There were times where he looked more like a police counselor talking a jumper down from a ledge than a wrestling trying to give a simple signal to a moron. The King of Swing, Stevie Richards and his new ringside fan routine. I guess if you're given nothing to do, you may as well have a good time doing it. Julian Licht. Camberwell, Victoria, Australia. Mysterio Jr. Guerrero. Normally I don't bother borrowing or trading for tapes of WCW pay-per-view shows, but the Rey Mysterio Jr. Eddie Guerrero match at Halloween Havoc made this an exception. A friend had sworn it was one of the best matches of the year, and fortunately he was correct. The match had it all: psychology, suicidal moves, innovative moves, and drama. The match was ahead of its time. It even surpassed the Chris Jericho vs. Ultimo Dragon match on July 7, 1995. That match I previously considered as one of the best high-flying matches that I had ever seen. The crowd was into the match, not just for seeing Mysterio Jr.'s moves, but also based on Guerrero's heel antics and persona. Unfortunately, the majority of fans would rather pay to see a geriatric death match with Hogan vs. Piper. The constant evolution in wrestling is happening at a rapid pace. What was considered incredible and ahead of its time is quickly becoming outdated or outdone. The problem's in that today's wrestlers are going to suffer more injuries and have shorter careers. The Mitsuharu Misawa vs. Kenta Kobashi match from January is another match of the year candidate. They went at an amazing pace for 42 minutes. Every move in the match meant something. What it lacked in high flying, more than made up in brutality and stiffness. As much praise as Joey Styles earns, I believe Mike Tenay is a better choice for Announcer of the Year. Styles is a great asset to the ECW product, but I doubt his style would work anywhere else. I prefer Tenay, who has more knowledge of history, backgrounds, and imparts drama and psychology better into a match. Tenay adds to a match what Jim Ross did during the UWF and WCW days. Yoshihiro Tajiri is one of the most improved wrestlers and also among the most underrated. His matches in Big Japan are the only thing redeemable for the bloodiest promotion I've ever seen. In a group like Big Japan, there is no need to improve your wrestling ability. That makes it an even better reason why Tajiri should be commended. He can have an excellent match without cutting his head off, unlike the rest of the wrestlers in that promotion. He proved earlier this year he could hang with the New Japan Junior Heavyweights and the top Mexican stars. Eric Bimbin. Brooklyn, New York. 1997. Who would have thought 1997 would have been such an interesting year? From the Michaels vs. Hart feud to the stink bomb WCW pay-per-view main events, 1997 will not soon be forgotten. Choosing a Wrestler of the Year was a challenge because nobody was able to really break away from the pack. And no matter how well WCW TV and PPVs did, they've laid too many eggs on pay-per-view to be called the best promotion of the year. For my money, nothing beats the excitement of the New Japan Junior Heavyweight division. New Japan is well booked out and is the most entertaining wrestling promotion in the world. As far as Kenta Kobashi and Mitsuharu Misawa are concerned, they're great wrestlers, but All Japan is as stake as a 3-week-old cracker, and don't even get me started on Akira Taue and Giant Baba. ECW is a perplexing entity. The promotion is pretty well booked, but with the loss of so many wrestlers and their disgusting internal problems, the Eric Kulas incident, New Jack and their handling of fans at shows, ECW is a promotion that should be shunned and not revered. Vince McMahon should hire Paul Heyman as his booker and talent coordinator and let ECW fade away before the company causes any more harm to anyone. Just think of what Heyman could do with some talent and some money backing him up. As much as I hate to admit it, I think Degeneration X is kind of funny. Who else could get away with ripping on Sergeant Slaughter's chin? Won't the WWF be great in 1998? With a lineup like the DOA, Truth Commission, Nation of Domination, LOD, Rhodey and Billy Gunn, you may have to expand the worst match of the year category. Luis Sanchez. Dover, New Jersey. Underrated. The most underrated guy in the business has to be Chris Benoit. He's never held a title in WCW, while such talented guys like Steve McMichael, Prince Iaukea and Disco Inferno have. Ed Branscombe. Greensboro, North Carolina. Pillman. Brian Pillman's death reminded me of two things. One was a Saturday Night Live sketch where they joked about somebody smoking one of John Belushi's Reiner joints. After his drug-related death, I wondered if anyone at SNL wished they hadn't played up his wild lifestyle, instead pointed out its negative impact and pushed him to get rehabilitation. There's an obvious similarity in the Pillman situation. The other was when Hulk Hogan remarked about not doing any risky moves to Mark Marrow. Both thoughts are about giving fans and promoters what they want as the risk of a wrestler's health and longevity. Wrestling constantly evolves. Its current incarnation has 3 outstanding characteristics. More high-risk maneuvers.
extremely stiff brawling, and angles designed to look like shoots. At what point does it go too far? In the reality of wrestling, the answer is when it stops getting over. I read about Tommy Dreamer and Sandman's injuries and concussions, but they don't stop taking stiff shots to the head because it gets them over. Eddie Guerrero comes back with a new physique and immediately they put a belt on him. Shawn Michaels shows up on television in no condition to perform and they still put him on the air. Ban the Blade? The Hercules incident should have woken us all up. Except when people wanted to see blood. The top tier guys have always been pressed to come back ASAP, but isn't Steve Austin being rushed back? If so, it is worth the risk of not waiting for him to fully heal up. Mick Foley was wisely modified his style, but what about Sabu? Many older wrestlers who rarely left the ground have had to get hip replacements. What's the future hold in store for today's wrestlers? I'd love to watch Rey Mysterio Jr., but will he be performing, or even walking, when he reaches 30 years old? What about great Sasuke, Psicosis, and Juventud Guerrera? Steroid abuse has greatly decreased and even been discouraged, but what do pushing people like China, Bill Goldberg, and Brackus tell? And with WCW adding a Thursday night show, how will the added time, pressure and demands of this affect just not the in-ring personalities but the behind-the-scenes health of the wrestlers as well? I don't believe anything was going to change Brian Pillman. I've heard his personality really had a big of the loose cannon in it. When Pillman adopted his new personality, it boosted his career and had everyone buzzing. However, didn't anyone learn anything from the Von Erichs? Did anyone think if the work/reality line was being too blurred for him what the end result would be? That line also exists between ignoring and pain and the reality of the painkillers. Hindsight is 20/20 and I don't want to sound judgmental, but I feel sad and cheated by Pillman's early death and don't want to see any more prematurely ended careers. Joe Borzada. Hoboken, New Jersey. Meng. It seems like lately at least one issue per month there is some reference to Meng being the reputed toughest man in the business. Maybe you can tell us something about his credentials to have such an honor bestowed upon him. It seems like everyone doesn't realize that Ken Shamrock, Dan Severn and Don Fry are all in this business now. I had to laugh when reading the October 27th issue about the incident with New Jack and Pitbull number 2 where the boys let them go at it because the feeling was that the much larger Pitbull could take him. After all the UFC shows that most of the boys probably watch, there is still that pro wrestling fantasy mentality that bigger must be better in a real fight. Don't forget that Leon White and Tony Halme were supposed to be two of the toughest big men in the business. One lost a fight to the much smaller Paul Orndorff, the other to a much smaller Randy Couture. Remember the Keith Hackney vs. Emmanuel Yarbrough match at UFC 3? If given the chance to really go at it 10 years ago, I bet Andre the Giant vs. Akira Maeda would have had a similar outcome. I've been a big wrestling fan for 23 years, but over the past year my taste for it has lessened and I hardly watch it anymore. I've really gotten into NHB and enjoy your coverage of it. You go into much more depth than fighting sports news, which I also subscribe to. Bob McKeon. Oakland Park, Florida. DM Meng's reputation as a tough guy comes from numerous bar fights over the years with end results of pulling out Jesse Barr's eye, biting the nose off someone who started trouble with him and beating up an occasional police force. WCW. I attended the November 1st WCW house show in Salem, Virginia. For years this market hosted anywhere from 1 to 2 events per month. After the Turner buyout it was 3 or 4 shows per year. Now it's 1 or 2 shows per year. The event was sold out. A few years ago, a couple of thousand people would have been considered good. The line at the souvenir stand was as long as I've ever seen. I realize with all the high-profile events in a year, it is easy to use these house shows as an opportunity to relax. However, in a market that has seen many good and even great house shows over the years, and on this night sold out the building, and more importantly, in a market the WWF will be running with a major event later in the month, one would think the company would try to at least give the fans of the promotion a solid night of wrestling. The lighting and the sound sucked. Lex Luger, Diamond Dallas Page, Conan, Scott Hall, Public Enemy, Raven and the Faces of Fear stole whatever paycheck they received for the show. Luger, Page, Conan and Hall were in such a hurry to get out of Dodge that they performed their headline match before intermission, and it was a 5-minute farce of a match. Not that many years ago, a match that bad wouldn't even be good enough to be an opening match on the card, much less one of the 2 main events. I have really tried to like Hall and Kevin Nash and appreciate what they've brought to the company, but the truth of the matter is they phone in all of their performances, even on television, and they drag down everyone they are in the ring with. The only wrestlers who put forth any effort were Steve Regal, Chris Jericho, Kurt Hennig, and Ric Flair. The only bad part of the Flair vs. Hennig match was the ending, with very weak interference from Conan, Why? Causing a DQ.
The attitude was very much like the WWF in its heyday.
The number one promotion that feels it can do anything and get away with it. Pitiful. It's a shame more pride can't be put into what these guys do for a living, especially when they are working in front of a rabid group of fans who spend a lot of money for a good night of entertainment. What logical person would recommend that Ric Flair, at the age of 48, go to the WWF?
What situation could they put him in and what clique would he end up with? Feuding with Jerry Lawler? His home is WCW and he should end his career in a territory that respects him and loves him. WWF fans weren't overly thrilled with him. Remember,
WCW fans to this day pop huge for him, and the crowd came specifically to see Flair versus Hennig. With all the hours of television they have and with more to come, Flair is a reliable, steady drawing card. He puts asses in the seats. Anyone who thinks otherwise is making a terrible mistake. WCW has momentum, so why start self-destructing now? Vince McMahon and the WWF are the most two-faced group of people on the face of the earth. He would do anything, and I mean anything, to get a TV rating or a pay-per-view buy rate. He's the man who set the standards for evil in the world of pro wrestling. Fritz von Erich couldn't hold a candle to him. Just think, if Brian Pillman hadn't have died, why would be in the middle of a love-child custody battle storyline?
The language on his television shows is stupid, pointless, and totally desperate, and shows a total lack of creativity.
I hope Jeff Jarrett can deliver those big ratings.
He sure never meant crap in WCW or the WWF his first time around.
Gary Morgan. Bluefield, West Virginia. Michaels. Unfortunately, the most memorable moment of the November 28 WWF Cleveland show started during the main event and ended in an embarrassing and all too frequent situation of wrestlers versus fans. To be fair to Shawn Michaels, I was unable to see what started the altercation. What I and every paying customer did see was a childish, unprofessional outburst by the WWF champion and the man who is supposed to represent the company. For several minutes, Michaels made repeated references to the fan being fat. While in a different context this may be seen as getting heat, the outburst came after the show was over and as fans were leaving the arena. Kudos to Bret Hart. Michaels proved himself once again to be immature, unprofessional, and selfish. This isn't to say fans weren't completely innocent. At various times throughout the show the fans were throwing things at the wrestlers. This ended up being a warm-up, because after the main event, Michaels stated that the fans had pouring, instigating a monsoon of garbage into the ring. A fan in the 8th row attempting to hit him with a cup hit a fan near ringside. This whole thing does nothing but insult in wrestlers and reflect poorly on the fans who attend the shows. Dominic Zamity. Tim Law. Cleveland, Ohio. Wrestling Observer Newsletter. P.O. Box 1228, Campbell, California 95009-1228. December 22, 1997.